Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is James Winters. I'm 31 years old and I fought in Korea. That was 2 years ago, but sometimes it feels like I never left, especially when the cold comes. The cold. That's why I'm out here 10 miles from my nearest neighbor and 30 miles from Pine River. Most people run from what scares them. I decided to face it. Maybe that was my first mistake. This old hunting cabin belonged to my grandfather. He used to tell me stories about hunting in these woods when I was a kid. He'd talk about the animals, the quiet of the forest, and sometimes, when he thought I was asleep, he'd whisper to my grandmother about the winter walkers. I always pretended not to hear. I arrived in late October, when the leaves were almost gone and the air had that crisp bite to it. The cabin was in rough shape. Roof leaked in 3 places, the door didn't shut right, and there were more mouse droppings than floorboards. But that's what I wanted, work. Physical work that would tire me out, so maybe I wouldn't dream at night. It took me 2 weeks to get the place livable. I patched the roof, fixed the door, and set enough traps to start my own mouse cemetery out. Back, I stacked firewood until my shoulders burned and my hands bled. I filled the pantry with cans and bags of rice and beans. I wasn't planning on leaving until spring. That's when Thomas Redfeather showed up with the last supplies I'd ordered from town. He's Ojibwe, been living in these parts his whole life. His truck barely made it up the old logging road. Early winter. Coming, he said, helping me unload. Not much of a talker, Thomas. Bad one. That's why I stocked up, I told him. He looked at me funny. Not regular cold, old cold. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. Before he left, he pressed something into my hand. It was a small leather pouch with beadwork on it. Keep this, he said, by your bed. I'm not one for superstition, but I thanked him anyway. There was something in his eyes that kept me from tossing it aside. I hung it on a nail by my cot that night, just to be respectful. The first snow came 3 days later. They'd predicted flurries, but what hit was a full-on blizzard. 18 inches in one night. The radio said it was the earliest heavy snow in 40 years. I didn't mind. I had my rifle, my supplies, and no one to answer to. The silence after a snowfall is something special. It wraps around you like a blanket, dampening every sound. But on the 3rd night, I saw the lights. I was out on the porch, smoking a cigarette, when the northern lights appeared. I'd seen them before, sure, but never like this. They were reaching down, green and purple fingers stretching all the way to the tree line, and they moved. Wrong, like they were searching for something, weaving. Between trees, I went back inside and added more wood to the fire. The next morning I found a rabbit. It was sitting upright in the snow about 20 feet from my front door. Perfectly normal, except it was frozen solid, rock hard. I brought it inside, set it by the fire to thaw so I could skin it. The strange thing was, after sitting next to a roaring fire for an hour, it was still frozen stiff. I started noticing other things too. Game trails that just stopped. Like the animals had disappeared mid-step, no tracks continuing, no signs of struggle, just nothing. The woods got quiet. And I don't mean peaceful quiet, I mean the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your heart beat faster. No birds, no wind in the branches, even though I could see them moving. My military training kept me alive in Korea. It taught me to trust my instincts, and my instincts were screaming that I was being watched. I'd scan the tree line, rifle ready, but never saw anything. Just endless white and the dark shapes of pines. But the feeling never went away. Eyes on me all the time. One night, I woke. Up suddenly. The fire had died down, and the cabin was dark and cold, colder than it should have been with the insulation I'd added. My breath came out in clouds so thick I could barely see through them. I reached for my rifle beside the bed and froze. There were footprints in the frost that had formed on my floor. They started at the door, circled my bed, and stopped at the window. Looking at them, I felt the cold from Korea seeping back into my bones. But the door was still locked from the inside, and the footprints, they weren't human, too long, too narrow, with no separate toes. Just smooth, elongated impressions. By morning, they were gone, like they'd never been there. But I knew what I'd seen. That's when I decided to set traps. Not for animals, for whatever was watching me. I didn't know then that I was the one being trapped. The isolation I sought was exactly what they wanted. Out here, no one can hear you scream. No one comes looking. Not until spring, and winter had only just begun. The first time my rifle stopped working, I thought it was just the cold. Guns can act funny in low temperatures. Any soldier knows that. But this was different. I was tracking a buck about a mile from the cabin. Good-sized one. Would have kept me fed for weeks. I raised my rifle to take the shot, and the metal felt wrong in my hands, brittle. When I pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The firing pin wouldn't move, like something was holding it in place. I checked the rifle later in the cabin. Nothing wrong with it. Worked perfectly. The next day, I found traps in the snow, not mine. Old-fashioned metal ones, the kind my grandfather might have used. They formed a perfect circle around my cabin, each one exactly 50 feet from the next. No footprints leading to them, just the traps, sitting in fresh snow. I took one back to the cabin. By morning, it was gone. In its place was a perfect circle of frost on my table. The cold spot started next. I'd be walking through the forest, and suddenly, like stepping through a doorway, the temperature would drop so fast, my lungs would hurt when I breathed. 30 degrees colder in a single step. Then, a few feet later, back to normal. Like pockets of winter tucked inside winter, I started marking these spots on a map. They made a pattern, a spiral, getting closer to my cabin each day. One morning, after a light snow, I went to check my own traps. That's when I saw it, a deer suspended mid-leap, frozen solid. Its back legs were still on the ground, front legs raised, eyes open and alert. Like someone had pressed pause on a movie. I touched it. Solid ice, all the way through. I didn't tell anyone about these things. Who would I tell? The nearest phone was in Pine River, and the roads were long buried. But I did have a radio, an old tube model my grandfather left. Most nights I'd get nothing but static, but sometimes, when the temperature dropped real low, I'd catch voices. Expedition reports temperature of 15 below at base camp. Roosevelt assured the nation today that the Soviets have denied any involvement in the old broadcasts. News items from years, decades ago, coming through clearer than any station should reach this far out. Then the dreams started. In them, I was walking through a world of ice. Everything, trees, animals, people, frozen in place, like statues. But their eyes followed me as I passed, and I wasn't alone. Tall, thin shapes moved between the frozen figures, studying them, touching them with long, pale fingers. I started finding things in the woods, ice sculptures, you could call them. But that doesn't quite capture how perfect they were. A fox, detailed down to each individual hair. An owl in mid-flight, wings spread, every feather distinct. Once, a perfect copy of my own boot print, filled with clear ice. My food started acting strange too. Cans I'd open would be frozen solid, despite sitting next to the stove all day. Then the next morning, they'd be thawed. Without me touching them, I was checking my map of cold spots when someone knocked on the door. Nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Thomas. His truck wasn't outside. "How did you get here?" I asked, letting him in. "Walked," he said, stomping snow from his boots. "Roads are gone now." "That's 30 miles. He just looked at me. "Had to come. Felt it." "Felt what?" "They're interested in you," he said, "like they were with your grandfather." My blood went cold at that. What happened to my grandfather? Thomas warmed his hands by the fire. He disappeared. 1943. Winter. Never found him. I'd always been told. My grandfather died of a heart attack. What are they? I asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to my map on the table. Take me here, he said, pointing to the center of the spiral I'd drawn. We hiked out the next morning. It was the coldest day yet. The kind of cold that makes trees crack and split. In the center of my spiral was a small hill I'd never explored. Thomas started digging in the snow with his hands. Here, he said. Under the snow were rocks, and on the rocks pictures, old carvings. They showed tall, skinny figures with long arms. They stood among smaller human shapes. In some drawings, the tall figures seemed to be holding ice or water in their hands, controlling it. My people called them winter walkers, Thomas said. They live in the spaces between things, between solid and liquid, between moments of time. I didn't want to believe him. But I was running out of other explanations. That night, the temperature dropped lower than I'd ever felt it. The thermometer read 60 below. The walls of the cabin creaked and moaned. The charm Thomas had given me swung on its nail, though there was no breeze. They're coming closer, Thomas said, staring out the window. They're curious about you. Why me? Same reason they wanted your grandfather. Something in your blood calls to them. I joined him at the window. Outside, the worst blizzard I'd ever seen was raging, but in the swirling snow, I could almost make out shapes. Tall, thin, moving in ways nothing human could move. What do they want? I asked. Thomas turned to me, his face grave. To add you to their collection. I saw them for the first time during the worst of the blizzard. The wind was howling so loud I couldn't hear myself think, and the snow was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet past the window. But then everything just stopped. The snowflakes hung in the air, not falling, not moving, like time itself had frozen. That's when they stepped through the curtain of suspended snow. They were tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet. Their bodies looked almost like glass, but not quite solid. More like water that had decided to stand up and walk. I could see right through them in some places, while other parts of their bodies bent the light like ice crystals. They had no faces that I could make out, just smooth, blank areas where a face should be. Don't move, Thomas whispered beside me. Don't make a sound. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. My whole body felt like ice, heavy and stiff. The creatures, 3 of them, moved around my cabin, studying it. Their arms were too long, their fingers like icicles. They seemed to glide rather than walk, leaving no footprints in the snow. One of them stopped, its blank face turning toward the window. Toward me. I felt a burning cold against my chest. My dog tags, the ones I'd kept from Korea, were freezing against my skin. I wanted to rip them off, but I was still frozen in place. The creature outside tilted its head, then backed away. A moment later, the snow began to fall again, and they were gone. What just happened? I gasped, finally able to move. They saw you, Thomas said, but something kept them back. He pointed to my chest. Those. I pulled out my dog tags. They were covered in frost. But the frost was forming strange patterns, not random, shapes like writing. Why did they leave? Metal, Thomas said. Certain metals burn them, and he touched the tags. These have seen real cold, the kind that kills. They respect that. The next morning we found ice on the inside of the fireplace. Actual ice, forming right next to the flames. It didn't melt, just sat there, defying everything I knew about how the world worked. They're testing the boundaries, Thomas said, learning what they can change. He told me about other disappearances over the years. A trapper in 1879, a family in 1902, a logging crew in 1934, all during unusually cold winters, all in this area. That afternoon I found something in the wall while patching a draft, a small tin box rusted with age. Inside was a journal, the pages yellow and brittle. It was dated 1879, written by the trapper Thomas had mentioned. The handwriting started neat, but got messier as it went on. The trapper described the same things I'd been seeing: cold spots, frozen animals, strange lights. The final entry ended mid-sentence. "They're coming through the walls now. I can see their hands reaching." "They've been here before," I said to Thomas. "They keep coming back. This place is special to them," he nodded. "Like a door they can use." The next day, I found the first copy of myself. It was about a half-mile from the cabin, a perfect ice sculpture of me, down to the stubble on my face and the patch on my coat. It was looking toward the cabin. The day after that, I found another one, closer, and another the next day, closer. Still, each one more detailed than the last, each one facing the cabin. Then the time slip started happening. I'd be walking in the forest and suddenly see people who weren't there. A man in old-fashioned clothes checking traps. A group of loggers with axes and saws from another time. Once, even my grandfather as a young man, looking right at me with recognition in his eyes before fading away. "They're breaking down the walls," Thomas explained that night. "Not just physical walls, the walls between times." "What do we do?" Thomas unpacked a small bag he'd brought. Inside were herbs, colored stones, and a small drum. "My grandmother taught me this," he said. "It won't stop them, but it might slow them down." He worked through the night, placing stones at each corner of the cabin, burning herbs that filled the room with sweet smoke, and softly chanting words I didn't understand while tapping the drum. By morning, there was a feeling around the cabin like a bubble holding back pressure. "How long will it last?" I asked. "Not long enough," he said. "They're learning too fast." That evening, I found another ice sculpture of myself. This one was on the porch, and this one had my dog tags around its neck, a perfect copy of mine made of clear ice. "They're studying you," Thomas said, examining it. "Learning how you work, how to make you permanent, like my grandfather." Thomas nodded slowly. "I think they have him, somewhere between here and there, between now and then." "Is he dead?" "No," Thomas said. "Worse. He's preserved, conscious, watching, forever." That night I dreamed I was my grandfather. I could see myself sleeping in the cabin, but I couldn't move or speak. I was trapped in ice, aware of everything, feeling the cold burn through me for what felt like years. I watched the seasons change in fast forward, people come and go, all while I remained, frozen in a perfect moment. I woke up screaming, my breath coming out as crystals in the freezing air of the cabin. That's when I noticed the protective stones Thomas had placed were covered in frost, and on the frost were symbols, the same ones from the petroglyphs under the snow. "They're talking to us," Thomas said, leaning close to read them. "They're saying they've been watching your family for generations. There's something in your blood, your mind, something they value." "What?" Thomas looked at me, his face grim. "Your ability to endure the cold." The storm hit in the middle of the night. Not a normal storm, this was something else. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. The snow didn't just fall, it attacked, driving sideways with enough force to strip bark from trees. I was thrown from my bunk when something crashed through the roof. A pine tree, snapped like a toothpick, had speared right through the cabin. Cold air and snow poured in. "The boundary's broken," Thomas shouted over the wind. "They're coming in." The protective stones he'd placed were scattered, some cracked clean in half. The charm by my bed had turned black. We worked fast to cover the hole with a tarp, but the damage was done. Whatever protection we had was gone. The cabin temperature dropped so quickly that water froze in the cups on the table. That's when Thomas screamed. He was by the fireplace trying to get the flames higher when his body went rigid. His eyes bulged and his skin turned blue-white. In seconds, he clawed at his chest, gasping. I ran to him, caught him as he fell. His skin was ice cold, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the sound, a crackling like stepping on a frozen puddle. It was coming from inside him. There, in me, he choked out. Water in my blood. I ripped open his shirt. Through his skin, I could see it. His blood vessels turning white with frost, spreading like tree branches under his skin. I dragged him to the fire, held him close to the flames. The crackling slowed but didn't stop. His breathing came in short, painful. Gasps. Listen, he whispered. They can control water, all forms, in air, in ground. He gripped my arm with surprising strength. In us. My military training kicked in. In Korea, I'd seen men freeze to death. I knew what to do for cold injuries. But this was different. This was cold from the inside out. Your tags, Thomas gasped. The metal. Why they... One can't touch you directly. I pulled my dog tags from my shirt. They were vibrating slightly, giving off a faint hum. Certain metals. Disrupt them, he continued, each word a struggle. Your grandfather knew. His bullets. What about his bullets? Special mix. Copper, phosphorus. I remembered my grandfather's old ammo box still in my pack. I'd brought it for sentimental reasons. The bullets were hand-loaded, too old to use safely in a modern rifle. I fetched the box, pried it open. The bullets inside were tarnished, with strange blue-green marks around the copper tips. Outside, the storm had stopped. Not gradually. It had simply ceased, as if someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Through the gaps in the tarp covering the hole, I could see them. Dozens of the winter walkers surrounding the cabin, not moving, just watching. They're trying to finish what they started. With your grandfather, Thomas said. His voice was getting weaker. They've been collecting, preserving moments, people. Why? Where they come from, time is like water, flows. Here, time is fixed. They want to make specimens, like a museum. That's when I noticed something through the broken window. About 50 yards from the cabin, there was another cabin, a perfect replica of mine, made entirely of ice. Through its transparent walls, I could see ice furniture, ice books, an ice version of myself sitting at the table. They're making a copy, I said, of everything. Not a copy, Thomas corrected. A preservation, a perfect moment. More ice structures were appearing in the clearing around the cabin. A frozen logger from another time. A trapper checking. His lines, a family huddled together, all perfectly detailed, all conscious, their eyes moving, following me. Your grandfather. Thomas coughed, and I saw blood, already turning to slush. He's there, has been watching you. I scanned the ice figures and saw him. A young man, maybe 30, with my jawline and eyes. My grandfather, preserved as he'd been in 1943. His eyes locked with mine, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. They've been watching your family for generations, Thomas said. Something in your makeup, your ability to endure cold, to adapt. They want to understand it. Through the night, I tended to Thomas. His condition stabilized, but didn't improve. The freezing in his veins had stopped spreading, but the damage was done. Parts of him were literally frozen solid. Meanwhile, the winter walkers continued their work outside. More ice structures appeared, more moments preserved. And with each new addition, they moved closer to the cabin. At dawn, I saw it, a perfect ice replica of Thomas and me, frozen in the exact positions we were in now. They had already mapped it out, already decided the moment they would take us. They're going to try soon, Thomas whispered. His lips were blue, his eyes glazed with frost. When the sun sets, cold will be strongest then. How do we stop them? You don't, he said. But you can trap them. like they trap others. He explained, his voice growing fainter, that the Winter Walkers existed in a dimension where time was a physical medium they could shape. Their intrusions into our world were attempts to preserve moments they found valuable, like a collector, taking specimens. The boundary between their world and ours thins in extreme cold, he said. They're trying to make it permanent. A doorway. How do we close it? Fire and the metals together. His eyes were closing. But be careful. They can show you things, tempt you. As the day wore on, the ice structures outside multiplied. Some were new, others were from centuries past. All perfectly preserved, all conscious, and from every frozen face I felt the same thing, envy, not of me but of my warmth, my ability to move through time naturally. That evening, Thomas died. His last words were in Ojibwe. I didn't understand them, but I felt there. Wait, a passing of knowledge, a final warning. As the sun began to set, the Winter Walkers moved closer. The air around the cabin grew colder than I thought possible. My breath turned to snow before it left my mouth. Outside, my grandfather's frozen form was directly before my window now. His eyes were pleading, and suddenly I could hear his voice in my head. James, they can show you everything, all of time, all knowledge. Join us. I covered Thomas's body with a blanket. There was no way to dig a grave in the frozen ground, and no time anyway. The sun was setting, painting the snow blood red. The Winter Walkers were getting bolder, moving closer to the cabin with each passing minute. My grandfather's frozen form stood just 10 feet from my door now. His mouth didn't move, but I could hear him in my head. James, they can preserve you, keep you conscious forever. You'll see the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars. Join us. I shook my head, trying to clear his voice away. It wasn't really him talking. It was them, using his image to get to me. I checked my grandfather's ammunition. Box again. There were 12 bullets left, each with that strange copper phosphorus tip. I loaded them into my rifle, though I wasn't sure if bullets could hurt something that wasn't quite solid. The rifle felt warm in my hands now, almost vibrating, like it recognized what was coming. Outside, the Winter Walkers had formed a circle around the cabin. I counted 20 of them, tall and shimmering in the fading light. Behind them stood their collection, dozens of ice figures from across time, all watching, all aware. I thought about what Thomas had said. These things existed in a place where time was like water, something they could shape and control. Here, they were trying to create a permanent doorway. I needed to close it, not just run from it. That's when I remembered something from Korea. When we needed to destroy an enemy position, we didn't just attack it, we turned it into a trap. Used their own fortifications against them. I looked at my cabin with new eyes. It wasn't just my shelter, it was their target, the center of their doorway. I worked quickly as darkness fell. I took my lantern oil and doused the walls, the floor, the furniture. I crushed my grandfather's bullets, separating the copper phosphorus, tips from the casings, and mixed the powder with the oil. I didn't know if it would work, but it was all I had. As night fully set in, the temperature dropped to levels that shouldn't be possible. The thermometer outside my window had shattered. The metal nails in the cabin walls were contracting so much they popped out one by one, like the cabin itself was coming apart. I knew I couldn't stay inside. That was what they wanted, to freeze me in place, to add me to their collection. So I did the opposite of what my survival instincts screamed at me to do. I opened the door and walked out. The cold hit me like a physical blow. It was beyond cold. It was an absence of heat so complete that it felt like my skin might shatter. But I kept walking, right into the circle of Winter Walkers. They seemed surprised, if such creatures could feel surprise. They drew back slightly, their forms rippling like disturbed water. I know what you want, I said, my words turning to ice crystals as they left my mouth. You want to understand us, how we move through time, how we endure the cold. The closest winter walker extended a long, thin arm toward me. Its fingertips were like icicles, sharp and clear. I'll show you, I said, backing toward the cabin. I'll show you how we survive. I reached the door, stepped back inside. They followed, their tall forms having to bend to enter the low doorway, just as I'd hoped. Once 3 of them were inside, I struck a match and dropped it. The cabin exploded into flames. Fire raced across the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling. The winter walkers made a sound I'll never forget, like ice cracking on a frozen lake, but 100 times louder. They tried to retreat, but the doorway was blocked by their own kind. The flames weren't just orange, they burned blue-green where they touched the copper-phosphorus mixture. And where that strange fire touched the winter walkers, they didn't just burn, they shattered. The heat was unbearable, but I forced myself to stay conscious, to watch what happened next. The breaking winter walkers seemed to tear holes in the air itself. Through these holes, I caught glimpses of another place, a world of endless ice where time stood still in layers like geological strata. I staggered out through the back window as the cabin roof collapsed. The fire was spreading now, racing. In a circle around the perimeter I'd marked with the special mixture, the remaining winter walkers were caught in some kind of temporal explosion. They stretched and distorted like reflections in a funhouse mirror. The ice figures, their collection, began to crack and melt, releasing bursts of light as their preserved moments returned to the flow of time. I saw my grandfather's ice form shatter, and for a brief instant, he stood before me as flesh and blood, young and strong. He smiled, nodded once, and then was gone, back to his proper time. The fire burned for hours, far longer than it should have given the materials. The snow didn't put it out. Instead, it hissed and steamed and added to the chaos. By dawn, it was over. Where my cabin had stood was now a perfect circle of bare ground. No ash, no debris, just exposed earth that steamed in the morning light. The winter walkers were gone. Their collection was gone. The doorway was closed, but something had changed. In me, as I stood there, I felt different. Part of me felt lighter, like something physical had left my body, and part of me felt heavier, like I'd taken on something new. Sometimes I see frost patterns form on surfaces near me, even on warm days. Sometimes I can feel the slow crawl of time in a way I never could before. And sometimes, when I look in a mirror quickly, I catch a glimpse of something else looking back, something tall and patient and cold. I never returned to civilization. I built a new shelter far from where the cabin had stood, but I stayed in these woods, watching over the spot where the door once began to open. Over the years, hikers and hunters have reported seeing a strange man in these parts. A man who warns them away from certain areas when the winter gets too cold. A man whose breath doesn't fog in the air. A man who seems to appear and disappear with the snow. They call me the Winter Man now. The locals tell stories about me to scare their children into coming home before dark. Little do they know that I'm all that stands between them and the true winter that waits beyond. The winter that walks, the winter that watches, the winter that wants to preserve us all in its perfect, eternal cold. I am James Winters, and I am the guardian of the cold between. My name is Margaret Thornton, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 38 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was a nurse at Charleston Memorial Hospital. That was before the divorce, before I decided to leave my old life behind. My ex-husband, Richard, controlled everything for 15 years. Our money, our friends, even what I wore. When we finally split up, I needed something that was completely mine. That's when I remembered my grandfather's old homestead deep in the West Virginia mountains. The place had been sitting empty for 5 years since Grandpa Joe died. Nobody wanted it because it was so far from everything, tucked away in a narrow valley that locals called Shadowed Hollow. The lawyer seemed relieved when I said I'd take it. Spring had just begun when I drove my old station wagon up the winding, dirt road. Trees reached over the path like they were trying to grab my car, and I had to stop twice to move fallen branches. The valley had a strange quiet to it. Even with the windows down, sounds seemed muffled, like the mountains swallowed them up. When I finally saw the farmhouse, my heart sank a little. The two-story wooden building leaned slightly to one side. The white paint had mostly peeled away, and the front porch sagged in the middle. Behind it stood a weathered barn, and off to the side was a small root cellar built into the hillside. The whole property, all 15 acres, was being reclaimed by nature. Weeds had taken over what used to be the garden, and the pasture was overgrown with brambles and small trees, but it was mine, all mine. I spent that first day just clearing a path to the front door. Inside wasn't much better. Dust covered everything, and mice had chewed through some of the furniture, but the structure was solid, and after opening windows to air the place out, it already felt more like home than the sterile apartment Richard and I had shared. The next morning, I drove into the nearest town, Elkridge, for supplies. The general store had everything from groceries to hardware, and the man behind the counter introduced himself as Mason Reynolds. "Thornton Place, huh?" he said when I told him where I was staying. "That's been empty a good while now." Joe was a strange old bird, kept to himself mostly. "You're his granddaughter?" I nodded. "I'm fixing it up, starting with the garden." Mason frowned slightly. "That's a mighty isolated spot for a woman alone." "I prefer it that way," I said firmly. As he rang up my seeds and tools, Mason leaned in close. "Bit of advice? Stay away from the hollow ground up near the old mining entrances. That land ain't right." I thanked him politely but brushed off his warning. I'd heard plenty of mountain superstitions growing up during summer visits to Grandpa, Joe. Back at the homestead, I found myself drawn to Grandpa's old office. The desk drawers were filled with notebooks, journals he'd kept for decades. Curious, I started reading one from his later years. The first entries were normal enough. Weather, reports, garden notes, repairs he'd made. But as I kept reading, the writings became stranger. He wrote about the bone folk who came during new moons, about protective circles of salt and iron he'd laid around the property. There were detailed drawings of bizarre arrangements of bones and metal scraps. "They're testing the boundaries again," one entry read. "Found another of their markers by the North Pasture Spring. They remember the blood price from '67. Won't let them take another." I put the journal down, telling myself Grandpa had gotten confused in his old age. I'd deal with the journals later. For now, I had a garden to clear. As I dug into the overgrown plot, my shovel hit something hard. I scraped away the dirt to find what looked like a perfect circle of small animal bones. They were arranged in a pattern with a piece of rusty metal in the center. It gave me a chill, but I told myself it was probably just the remains of some animal that had died there, disturbed by other critters. I tossed the bones aside and continued working. Over the next few weeks, I fell into a rhythm. Up at dawn, working on the house and land until dusk. I cleared the garden and planted vegetables. A farmer in town sold me 6 chickens and 2 goats to start my little homestead. I repaired the chicken coop and fixed the worst of the barn roof. The physical work felt good after years of being told I was too delicate for such things. But sometimes, especially at night, the valley felt wrong. The quiet was too complete, like the mountains were holding their breath. And sometimes I would hear sounds from the woods, a strange clicking, partly metallic, partly like bones knocking together. The animals felt it too. The goats refused to graze in the north pasture, no matter how often I led them there. The chickens would sometimes go silent all at once, all of them staring in the same direction at nothing I could see. One morning, I found something disturbing at the edge of the property. A strange arrangement of rusty nails, wire, and what looked like a bird's skull, all carefully placed in a pattern identical to one of the drawings in Grandpa's journal. I told myself kids from town were playing pranks, but deep down, I knew no one from town came this far into the mountains. That night, I dreamed of dark tunnels where the walls felt warm, like skin. I woke up sweating, with the strange feeling that someone had been watching me sleep. I was beginning to understand why Grandpa Joe had grown so strange in his later years. This place got into your head. But I wasn't about to give up. I had nowhere else to go, and I was determined to make this work. I just didn't know then what it would cost me, or what was already stirring beneath my feet, sensing my presence, testing me. I didn't know I'd been expected. The first time I knew something was truly wrong was when the chickens disappeared. I'd gone to bed with 6 hens safely locked in their co-op. When I woke up and went to feed them, only 4 remained. The coop door was still latched from the outside, exactly as I'd left it. Foxes, I told myself, though it didn't make any sense. Or maybe weasels. But there was no blood, no feathers, no signs of a struggle. Just 2 missing chickens and perfect circular holes cut in the wire mesh, holes too clean to be made by animal teeth. I reinforced the coop with extra wire and thicker wood. 2 nights later, another chicken vanished the same way. That day, I decided to walk the entire property line. Maybe there was something about this place I wasn't seeing. The 15 acres stretched longer than I expected, the trees growing thicker toward the north end, where the land rose steeply. I found myself getting turned around several times, spots I thought I recognized suddenly looking different from new angles. That's when I found the first mine entrance, a dark opening in the hillside, partially collapsed but still large enough for a person to crawl through. Around the entrance, someone had arranged bits of scrap metal, deer antlers, and smooth river stones in strange patterns. Faded carvings marked the rocks nearby, symbols I didn't recognize but that made my skin crawl. I remembered Mason's warning about hollow ground and stepped back quickly. As I turned to leave, a voice called out, "You're Joe Thornton's girl, aren't you?" I nearly jumped out of my skin. An old woman stood watching me from between 2 oak trees. Her white hair hung in a single braid, and she leaned on a walking stick made from a twisted branch. "His granddaughter," I corrected, catching my breath. "I'm Maggie." She nodded as if confirming something. "Eliza Weaver. My place is over the ridge. Saw the smoke from your chimney these past weeks." "Nice to meet you," I said, though something about her unsettled me. "Do you know anything about these markings?" I pointed to the mine entrance. Eliza's face went still. "Those are warnings. About those that the Earth took back after the collapse of 23. "The mine collapse?" Mason at the store mentioned something about that. 27 men went into that mountain. None came out. She tapped her walking stick against the ground. At least, not as men. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? But Eliza just shook her head. "Your granddaddy knew to respect the property lines, the boundaries. You'd do well to learn the same." With that, she turned and disappeared among the trees before I could ask more. That night, I couldn't find my house keys anywhere. I'd put them on the kitchen table as always, but they were gone. After searching for an hour, I gave up and used the spare I kept hidden on the porch. The next morning, my keys were back on the table, arranged in a perfect circle. I started having nightmares every night, dreams of being trapped in tunnels where the walls felt warm and seemed to breathe. In these dreams, I could hear tapping in the distance, like someone working with hammer and chisel. The sound would get closer and closer until I woke up, heart pounding. A big storm hit the following week. Rain pounded the roof and wind howled through the trees. The power went out around midnight. I was reading one of Grandpa's journals by candlelight when a flash of lightning lit up the window. In that split second of brightness, I saw them, three misshapen silhouettes moving in, perfect unison around the barn. They didn't move like people or animals, more like puppets with too many joints. When the next lightning flash came, they were gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, tree branches blowing in the wind. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found the goats huddled in the corner of their pen, shivering despite the warm spring air. They refused to eat. When I checked the water trough, the water had turned a rusty red color. I emptied it and refilled it. But by afternoon, it was red again. Curious and afraid, I took a sample in a jar to test. My nursing background came in handy. The simple test kit I had showed it wasn't rust at all. It was hemoglobin, blood. That afternoon, I explored the root cellar for the first time since arriving. The small stone structure built into the hillside was cool and dark inside, with wooden shelves lining the walls. Old preserves and canning jars stood in neat rows, their contents long spoiled. At the back, half hidden behind a shelf, I found a door I hadn't noticed before. It was small, more like an access panel with a heavy iron handle. I pulled it open to find a narrow tunnel leading deeper into the hill. Common sense told me not to enter a strange tunnel alone, but I was drawn to it. I grabbed a flashlight and crawled through. The tunnel widened after about 10 feet, becoming tall enough to stand in. The walls were part natural stone, part old timber supports. My flashlight beam showed the passage continuing forward with several branches leading off in different directions. I walked slowly, mapping the turns in my head, but soon realized something impossible. These tunnels extended far beyond where the root cellar should end. It was like they existed in a space that shouldn't physically fit within the hillside. After about 20 minutes of walking, I heard a sound that froze my blood. The same clicking noise I'd heard from the woods at night, but closer, clearer. It echoed from one of the side passages. I turned and ran, not stopping until I was back outside, heart hammering in my chest. I slammed the root cellar door and locked it. That evening, Mason from the general store drove up to deliver some supplies I'd ordered. As he helped me unload the truck, I carefully asked about the mine collapse. "Bad business," he said, wiping his forehead. My grandfather was the foreman back then, blamed himself till the day he died. What exactly happened? Mason hesitated. Official story is that support beams gave way, trapped the miners inside. They couldn't dig them out. And the unofficial story? I pressed. He looked toward the hills, then back at me. My grandfather used to say they found something down there, something that shouldn't have been disturbed. The collapse wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. Before he left, Mason warned me again. People around here know to leave this valley alone after dark. You should think about moving to town. That night, I woke to scratching sounds from inside the walls. It followed me as I moved from room to room, always behind the wall nearest to where I stood. When I pressed my ear against the wallpaper, I could hear a faint tapping, like a code. In the morning, I went to check my garden. What I found made me sink to my knees in shock. Every plant had been uprooted, not torn up or eaten, but carefully removed and arranged in circular patterns across the dirt. The roots were all exposed to the air, but placed with such strange precision it looked almost surgical. As I knelt there trying to make sense of it, I noticed something half buried nearby. The edge of one of Grandpa's journals that I hadn't found before. The soil around it was freshly disturbed, as if the earth itself had pushed it up for me to find. I brushed off the dirt and opened it. Inside were maps, detailed drawings of tunnel systems extending far beyond the official mine workings I knew about. And on the last page, in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, "They're coming back sooner this time. God help whoever's here when they rise." I couldn't sleep that night. Grandpa's journal maps showed tunnels running under the entire property, some coming right up beneath the house. According to his notes, the official mine was just the beginning. Something else had been digging down there for decades. The next morning, I forced myself to check a spot marked with an X in the cellar of the main house. Behind an old cabinet, I found a loose stone in the wall. When I pulled it out, there was a small space with a metal box inside. The box held strange tools I didn't recognize, a small pistol, and glass bottles filled with powders and liquids. There were more journals, too, these ones filled with observations about their habits and their weaknesses. They're drawn to metal, one entry read. They consume it somehow. They sense it like we smell food. Another entry was more disturbing. They took Colin's boy last night. Nothing left but his shoes, arranged in their pattern. They're getting bolder, coming closer to houses now. I sat on the dusty cellar floor, trying to make sense of it all. Was my grandfather crazy, or was something truly horrible happening here? A loud thud from upstairs broke my thoughts. I grabbed the pistol and hurried up the steps. Nothing seemed out of place in the kitchen, but a steady tapping sound came from inside the wall. As I moved toward it, the tapping followed me, like something was tracking my movements from within the wall itself. I put my hand against the wallpaper. The tapping stopped. Then something pushed back against my palm, just slightly, but enough to make me jump away. That afternoon, heavy rain poured down for hours. When it finally stopped, I walked the property to check for damage. What I found instead were sinkholes, perfect circular holes about 2 feet across that hadn't been there before. They formed a pattern across the north pasture, like connect the dots, in the shape of a spiral. I dropped a pebble into one of the holes. I never heard it hit bottom. That night the goats screamed. By the time I got my boots on and ran to the barn, one was dead. Its body was wrong. Cuts ran along its sides with surgical precision, but there was hardly any blood. When I looked closer, I realized certain bones had been removed without breaking the skin. I buried the poor animal the next day, my hands shaking the whole time. The remaining goat bleated nervously, pressing itself into the corner of its pen. "It's okay," I whispered, though we both knew it wasn't. "I won't let anything happen to you." But 2 days later, it was gone without a trace. I noticed other things disappearing too, metal things. The rake I'd left by the garden, a bucket from the barn, even the copper bottom of a cooking pot that had been sitting on the stove. Each time, I found small bite marks in the wood or stone nearby. Perfect little circles like something had taken precise bites. I began writing everything down, using my nursing training to be systematic. I noted times, locations, patterns. The events always intensified as the moon waned, becoming strongest when it was completely dark. The new moon was coming in 3 days. I remembered Mason's warning and drove to town to talk to him. The general store was empty, except for an older man I hadn't met before. Mason took some time off, he said when I asked. "Family emergency up in Charleston. Should be back end of week." I felt a sinking feeling. The timing seemed too convenient. That night, I sat on the porch with the pistol in my lap, watching the tree line. Hours passed with nothing but normal night sounds, crickets, an occasional owl. Then, just after midnight, the crickets went silent. I held my breath, straining to see, in the darkness. At first, I thought it was a trick of shadows, but then I saw it clearly, a figure emerging from the ground at the edge of the yard. Not climbing out of a hole, but rising through the soil like it was water. It stood about the height of a person, but didn't move like one. Its limbs bent at odd angles, too many joints moving in ways that human bones couldn't. Its skin had a metallic sheen in the moonlight, like tarnished copper, with patches that looked like rust. Where a face should be, it had only a smooth surface with small indentations. I sat frozen, afraid to move. The thing turned slowly, seeming to search for something. It made that clicking sound I'd heard, a noise coming from inside its body, like metal pieces tapping against bone. After what felt like forever, it sank back into the ground, disappearing, without leaving a mark on the soil. I ran inside and locked every door and window. Sleep was impossible. In the morning, I found Eliza Weaver sitting on my porch. "You've seen them now," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, too exhausted to deny it. "There's a reason your family has kept this land," she said. "A reason it passed to you." "What are they?" I asked. "When the mine collapsed in 23, something changed the men trapped inside, changed their bodies. They became other, part metal, part bone, part something else." She looked toward the north pasture. "The company said all the miners died, but some of us knew better. We heard them moving under the ground, taking things, taking people sometimes. Why didn't anyone do anything? Why didn't they tell people? Who would believe it? And the mining company paid good money to keep it quiet." Eliza's eyes met mine. "Your grandfather was the only one who stayed, who learned to manage them. He became the keeper. That afternoon, I experienced something even stranger. I was in the kitchen when everything suddenly stopped. The clock, the dripping faucet, the fly buzzing against the window. Complete stillness. In that frozen moment, I saw movement at the edge of my vision, shadowy figures sliding between spaces that shouldn't have been there. Then everything started again, but 5 hours had passed in what felt like seconds. I drove back to town immediately, desperate to find Mason. His truck was parked outside the store. "I need to talk to you," I said when I found him inside, "about what's really happening in Shadowed Hollow." His face went pale. "Not here." We sat in his truck, and I showed him pictures I'd taken of the strange figures and bone arrangements. "Jesus," he whispered, "it's happening again." "What is? What's happening?" Mason's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "Every 44 years, they get more active. More of them come up. It's something to do with the mining chemicals in the groundwater reaching certain levels." He took a long drag. "The collapse in 23 wasn't just to trap the miners. It was to trap what they found down there. And my grandfather, what was his role in all this?" Mason wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your family has a certain blood type, rare. It helps you sense them, see them when others can't." He finally looked at me. "You've been feeling dizzy sometimes? Losing track of time? That's them reaching out to you." As I drove home, Mason's words echoed in my mind. According to him, my blood had made me a target. A test came back. During my last physical showing, I had an unusual Rh variant. The doctor had mentioned it was extremely rare. That night, I had the worst nightmare yet. I was in the tunnels again, but this time I could see the walls breathing, and ahead of me a massive chamber opened up, filled with hundreds of the metal bone creatures, all clicking and moving in unison around something in the center, something much larger that pulsed with a sickly light. I woke up to the sound of scratching at my bedroom window. When I looked, I saw long, thin fingers, part metal, part bone, tapping against the glass. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that for just a moment, the tapping sounded like a pattern I recognized, like it was trying to communicate, like it knew my name. I spent the following day boarding up the first-floor windows. Whatever these things were, they were getting bolder. I found handprints, if you could call them that, pressed into the mud around the house. The fingers were too long, the palms too narrow. That evening, they came in numbers. I was heating soup on the stove when I heard the clicking sounds from all directions. Looking out through a crack in the boards, I counted 7 of them emerging from the ground. In the fading light, I could see them more clearly. They were shaped like people, but wrong in every detail. Their skin had the texture of rusted metal in some places, and the gleam of bone in others. They moved jerkily but with purpose, testing the doors and windows, tapping the walls. Bone folk, Grandpa had called them in his journals. Rust men, in another entry. Whatever name fit them, they weren't human anymore. I grabbed Grandpa's pistol, though I doubted it would do much good. One of the creatures pressed its face against a window, that smooth surface where features should be turning slowly like it was, sniffing me. They surrounded the house all night, tapping and clicking. By dawn, they had retreated back into the ground, but they left something behind, a perfect circle of small metal objects on the porch. Nails, coins, buttons, keys. My keys that had gone missing, arranged in a pattern around a small animal. Skull. It looked like an offering or a message. When Eliza appeared later that morning, I wasn't even surprised. "They're getting ready for the big emergence," she said, studying the arrangement on the porch. "The cycle is coming to its peak." "How do you know all this?" I demanded. Eliza rolled up her sleeve, showing a twisted scar running from wrist to elbow. "I was there in 23, the only one they took that came back. I've been keeping them quiet. Since then, with your grandfather's help." "Keeping them quiet how?" "Blood," she said simply. "They need it. Once a month, at the dark moon. It keeps them calm." She looked at me closely. "Your grandfather did the same. It's why he stayed." I thought about the strange medical supplies in the metal box, the journals mentioning the blood price. But why our family? Why me? "Your blood type. It's compatible with them somehow." She gestured toward the north pasture. "They're digging a bigger hole there, an emergence hole. Every 44 years, they try to bring more of themselves up." I walked with Eliza to the north pasture. Sure enough, the ground had been disturbed in a perfect circle about 20 feet across. The soil looked like it had been pushed up from below. "They extract metal from the soil," Eliza explained. "They need it to transform, to grow." A terrible thought struck me. "The hemoglobin in the spring water." Eliza nodded. "They're preparing. The big one's coming." That night, I searched the house more thoroughly than ever before. I found hidden compartments in walls, special locks on doors I hadn't noticed, lines of salt and iron dust in the wall cavities. The entire house had been modified to be a fortress against the creatures. In Grandpa's study, behind a false panel, I found his most secret records. Photos dating back to the 1920s showed the aftermath of what he called emergence events. The images were disturbing. Townsfolk with missing limbs, buildings half destroyed, huge pits dug into the earth. One journal entry caught my eye. "They cannot reproduce naturally. They need hosts, specific bloodlines." The company knew this when they sent those men down. They knew what was down there. A wave of nausea hit me suddenly. I'd been feeling sick on and off for weeks, chalking it up to stress and poor sleep. But now I wondered, I still had a pregnancy test from months ago, when Richard and I had been trying for a baby without success. I dug it out of my toiletry bag and used it with shaking hands. Positive. I sank to the bathroom floor, mind racing. Richard and I had been separated for nearly 4 months. If I was pregnant, it should barely show on a test. But according to this, I was well along. I lifted my shirt and looked at my belly. It was slightly rounded, something I hadn't paid attention to with everything else happening. How was this possible? A memory flashed in my mind. Grandpa's journal mentioning time slips, moments where the creatures could manipulate time around them. Had they somehow accelerated my pregnancy? And why? The next morning, I found more of the bone metal figures standing at the edge of the property. They didn't approach, just stood watching the house. Watching me, I called Mason in a panic. "They're interested in your condition," he said after I told him about the pregnancy test. "It must be part of their cycle." "What do you mean? Every emergence, they need new material, new bodies." His voice sounded strained. "Look, I'm coming out there. There are things I need to show you, things your grandfather left with my family." Mason arrived an hour later with a metal container. Inside was a thick yellow liquid in glass vials. Your grandfather developed this, he explained. It weakens the connection between the metal and bone in the entities, makes them vulnerable. I studied the vials. How do I use it? You don't, Mason said. His expression changed suddenly, hardening. I'm sorry, Maggie. I truly am. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm. I felt a sharp sting, a syringe. The room swam around me. My family has protected this town for generations, I heard him say as I slipped into darkness. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made. Your grandfather understood that. I woke in darkness, my head pounding. I was lying on cold stone. When my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a tunnel, one of the mine shafts. My hands were tied in front of me, and Mason sat nearby, a lantern between us. They need you, he said quietly. If they take you, they'll leave the town alone for another cycle. You've done this before, I whispered, understanding dawning. The missing people over the years. Mason looked away. Not me. My father. His father before him. He gestured helplessly. You don't understand what they can do when they're hungry. Oh, clicking sound echoed through the tunnel. Mason stood up. They're coming, I'm sorry. He turned to leave, taking the lantern with him. Wait, I called. The compound, your grandfather's compound. You can use it to stop them. It only weakens them temporarily, Mason said. Nothing stops them permanently. As his footsteps faded, I struggled against my bonds. The clicking grew closer. I could feel vibrations in the stone beneath me. My nursing training kicked in. I controlled my breathing, focused my mind. The ropes were tight, but not impossible. I worked my hands back and forth, feeling the knots loosen slightly. The first of the creatures appeared at the tunnel entrance, a twisted figure of metal and bone that moved with terrible purpose. Behind it came more, their bodies clicking and scraping against the stone. As they approached, something strange happened. My belly grew warm, almost hot. The baby inside me moved with sudden strength. The nearest creature paused, then bent toward my stomach, that featureless face tilting as if listening. In that moment, I understood. They weren't just interested in me as a sacrifice. They were interested in my baby, in what it might become. With a final effort, I slipped one hand free from the ropes. The creature reached for me, not to attack, but almost reverently. Its touch was cold and alien, and then, miraculously, it backed away. They all did, retreating to the edges of the tunnel, watching me. I stood up shakily. The creatures made no move to stop me as I walked past them toward the tunnel entrance. It was as if they were waiting for something. When I emerged into the night air, I could see the north pasture from the hilltop. The ground there was moving, bulging upward, as if something massive was pushing from below. The main emergence had begun. I ran through the dark woods, one hand on my swollen belly, the other holding the small knife I'd kept hidden in my boot. The creatures didn't follow, but I could hear them moving through the earth beneath my feet, traveling faster than I could run. When I reached the house, I went straight for Grandpa's metal box in the cellar. The compound Mason had shown me I needed it now. Grandpa's journals had mentioned a final solution he'd never implemented. If I could find his formula, maybe I could finish what he started. The north pasture glowed with an eerie blue light when I looked out the window. The ground continued to rise, like something enormous was pushing up from below. Around it, dozens of the bone metal creatures gathered, their bodies swaying in unison. I flipped frantically through Grandpa's notebooks until I found what I needed: chemical formulas, measurements, procedures. My nursing training helped me understand the medical aspects of his notes. He'd discovered the creatures had a weakness. Their bone metal fusion could be disrupted by a specific compound, but he'd never made enough to stop them all. I gathered everything I could find: the vials of yellow liquid, household chemicals, medical supplies. Working quickly in the kitchen, I mixed the ingredients according to his formula. My hands shook, but years of measuring medications steadied them when it mattered most. As I worked, I felt my baby move again, stronger this time, almost painfully. My pregnancy was accelerating at an impossible rate. Whatever connection existed between these creatures and my child was growing stronger. A crash from the front porch told me they had arrived. The clicking sounds surrounded the house now, punctuated by scraping against the walls. Looking out, I saw them, at least 20 of the entities surrounding the property. Among them stood Mason, his face pale in the moonlight. "They won't let. You stop the emergence," he called. "The town has an arrangement. We provide them with what they need, and they stay in the hollow." "By sacrificing innocent people?" I shouted back. "By offering me and my baby?" "It's how it's always been," Mason said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your grandfather understood." "No," I said. "He was finding another way. That's what all this research was for." I finished mixing the compound, a greenish liquid that gave off-sharp fumes. Grandpa's notes said it needed to be applied directly to the main entity, but to do that, I'd have to reach the center of the emergence hole. The ground shook, a tremor that knocked plates from shelves and pictures from walls. The blue glow from the north pasture intensified. I filled a backpack with the vials of compound and grabbed Grandpa's pistol. I didn't know if bullets would hurt these things, but it made me feel less helpless. When I stepped onto the porch, the creatures turned toward me but kept their distance. Mason backed away. "They know," he said. "They can sense what you're carrying, both. The baby and the compound." "Then they know I'm going to end this," I said, walking forward. The creatures parted as I approached, their metal bone bodies gleaming in the moonlight. They made no move to stop me as I headed toward the north pasture. The ground around the emergence hole had split open in a perfect circle. Blue light pulsed from within, casting strange shadows across the field. At the edge of the hole, I could see down into a massive chamber below, a space that couldn't possibly exist given the surrounding terrain. In the center of the chamber was the source of the light, a massive entity, similar to the smaller ones but enormous. Its body a complex fusion of metal, bone, and something else, something that glowed and pulsed like a heart. Around it, the smaller entities moved in patterns, bringing pieces of metal and bone to add to its form. It was growing, preparing to rise. "You can't approach it," Mason said from behind me. "No one ever has, and lived." But as I stood at the edge, the giant entity below shifted, turning what might have been a face toward me. The blue light pulsed brighter, and I felt a response from within my womb, my baby moving in rhythm with the pulsing light. I understood then what Grandpa's journals had meant by keeper. My family hadn't just been containing these things. We were connected to them somehow. The rare blood type, the strange perceptions, we were part of their cycle. As if confirming my thoughts, the smaller entities began to bring objects to me. Pieces of metal arranged in patterns, bones placed in circles. They were trying to communicate. One creature approached, different from the others. Its movement seemed almost familiar. It held out something clutched in its metal bone fingers, a gold wedding band, my grandfather's ring. "Grandpa," I whispered. The creature made no sound, but its head tilted in a way that sent chills through me. In that moment of horrible clarity, I saw the truth. The entities didn't just take people, they transformed them. My grandfather hadn't died 5 years ago. He had become one of them, had been watching over the property all this time. I felt sick with the realization, but also strangely calm. This was my inheritance, not just the land, but the responsibility. I was the new keeper, bound to this place. Through blood, and now through my child, the massive entity below shifted again, reaching up toward the surface world. I knew what I had to do. I removed the vials of compound from my backpack. Grandpa's formula wouldn't destroy the entities, nothing could, but it could weaken them, force them back into dormancy. But simple dormancy wouldn't be enough. They'd rise again, take more people, continue the cycle. I looked at the compound, then at my own hands. My medical knowledge sparked an idea. If I modified the formula, added my own blood with its rare properties. Working quickly, I cut my palm with the knife and let my blood drip into the mixture. The green liquid turned, a deep purple color, almost black in the moonlight. "What are you doing?" Mason asked, fear in his voice. "Breaking the cycle," I said. "My way." I stepped to the edge of the hole, feeling the heat rising from below. The massive entity reached up, blue tendrils of energy stretching toward me, toward my swollen belly. I poured the first vial directly onto the reaching tendrils. The entity recoiled, the blue light flickering. Around me, the smaller creatures backed away, their clicking sounds changing pitch to something like a scream. I emptied vial after vial into the hole, watching the compound spread through the chamber below, coating the massive entity. Its light dimmed, pulsed erratically. The ground stopped shaking, but something else was happening too. My modified compound was having an unexpected effect. Where it touched the entities, their metal bone forms began to change, not dissolving, but restructuring. The blue energy didn't disappear but transformed, flowing into new patterns. Pain shot through my abdomen. I fell to my knees at the edge of the hole, clutching my belly. I could feel my baby moving wildly, responding to whatever was happening below. "Maggie!" Mason shouted, running forward. But he was too late. The blue energy surged up from the hole, surrounding me in a column of light. I felt it enter me, flow, threw me into my unborn child. My skin tingled, then burned, then went numb. When the light faded, the emergence hole was closing, the ground flowing back together like water. The entities had vanished, sinking back into the earth. But they weren't gone. I could feel them now, all of them, their presence in the ground beneath my feet, in the air around me, in my own changing body. I looked at my hands. In the moonlight, my skin had a faint metallic sheen, like the finest dusting of copper. Mason stared at me in shock. "What did you do?" "I didn't destroy them," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I changed them, changed us." I understood now. The Keeper wasn't meant to fight the entities or contain them. The Keeper was meant to guide them, to be the bridge between their world and ours. My grandfather had known this, but hadn't been able to complete the transformation. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling my child move. This baby would be something new, not fully human, not fully other, a true keeper, born with the ability to control the entities, to keep them from harming others. "They won't need sacrifices anymore," I told Mason. "They have me now, and soon they'll have my child." Mason backed away, fear plain on his face. "You're one of them." "No," I said, "I'm something between, something new." I walked back toward the house, feeling the entities moving beneath my feet, following me, waiting for my commands. The land itself seemed to respond to my presence now, plants bending toward me, water rising in the spring as I passed. I wasn't Maggie Thornton anymore, not entirely. I had become what my grandfather had tried to be, the guardian of this land and its secrets, tied to it through blood and bone. And in 6 months, when my child was born, a new chapter would begin. Not of horror, but of balance. My baby would grow up understanding both worlds, keeping the boundary between them strong. As I reached the porch of my house, my true inheritance, I looked back at the mountains surrounding the valley. For the first time since arriving, the shadows didn't seem threatening. The silence felt like peace. The entities would sleep now until my child was ready. And I would prepare, learning to use my new awareness, my changed body. After all, this was Thornton land, and I was a Thornton right down to my rust and bone. My name is Richard Holloway. I'm 42 years old, and I came to this cabin in northern Michigan to escape my memories, to escape everything. 3 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah and our 2 children, Emily and Jason, in a house fire. I was working late at the university where I taught psychology. By the time I got home, there was nothing left but ashes and pain. After that, I couldn't teach anymore. I couldn't even sleep without seeing their faces in the flames. When I found out I'd inherited this cabin from an uncle I'd never met, it felt like a sign, a chance to start over where no one knew me or what happened, somewhere far away from concerned looks and whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. The cabin sits deep in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, surrounded by towering pine trees that whisper in the wind. The nearest town, White Pine, is 40 miles away down a dirt road that becomes impassable when it snows. It's perfect. It's exactly what I need. When I first arrived in early autumn, the place was a mess. The roof leaked, the windows were cracked, and mice had made homes in the walls. Fixing it gave me something to focus on. Each nail I hammered and board I replaced felt like I was rebuilding a tiny piece of myself. I quickly established routines. Wake at dawn, chop wood for the coming winter, hunt for food, work on the cabin until my muscles ached so badly I could fall asleep without pills. I even found an old ham radio that I've been trying to repair. Not that I want to talk to anyone, but it might be useful when the snow comes. Yesterday, while cleaning out a trunk in what used to be my uncle's bedroom, I found a stack of journals. At first I thought they might tell me something about this relative I never knew, but they're filled with strange writings. Notes about local folklore, drawings of symbols, and countless references to those who walk between the trees. The handwriting gets shakier in the later entries. Most people would say it's just the ramblings of an old man losing his mind to dementia. As a psychologist, I should know better than to give them a second thought. But I've kept them anyway. Maybe studying them will give me insight into how isolation affects the mind. That's what I tell myself, at least. I brought my dog Max with me. He's a big German shepherd, loyal to a fault. Sarah picked him out as a puppy. Sometimes when I look at him, I see her kneeling beside him, ruffling his ears the way she used to. He's my last connection to my old life, and I'm grateful for his company on days when the silence becomes too heavy. This morning, while hunting, I found something strange. Tracks in the soft earth that looked almost human, but were too large, the stride too long. I followed them for a while, until they simply stopped in the middle of nowhere, as if whatever made them had vanished into thin air. Nearby, a pine tree had been marked with a symbol carved deep into its bark, similar to the drawings in my uncle's journals. I told myself it was probably just some local kids playing pranks, but the forest is so remote. Who would come all this way just to carve symbols into trees? Last night, I had the most vivid dream. I was standing at the edge of the clearing where my cabin sits. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light. At the tree line, partially, hidden behind a massive pine, stood a figure, tall, impossibly tall and thin, watching me. In the dream, I tried to call out, but no sound came. I tried to move toward it, but my feet wouldn't obey. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, and Max was whining at the foot of my bed. Something else has been happening too. When I walk through the forest now, the birds go silent. Not gradually, but all at once, as if someone flipped a switch. Yesterday I spotted a deer about 30 yards away. It hadn't noticed me yet, and I raised my rifle, but before I could take the shot, it suddenly jerked its head up and bolted. I hadn't made a sound. It was as if it had sensed something dangerous, something that wasn't me. Max has been acting strange too. There's a small grove of pines about a quarter-mile east of the cabin. Every time we get near it, he stops dead in his tracks. His hackles rise, and no amount of coaxing will get him to take another step forward. I've tried approaching it alone, but even I feel uneasy there, though I can't explain why. I should be more worried about these things, I suppose. But the truth is, After what I've been through, very little scares me anymore. What's the worst that could happen out here? That I'd die alone in the wilderness? Sometimes I think that wouldn't be so bad. Winter is coming soon. The leaves have all fallen, and the mornings are frosty. Soon the snow will cut me off from the outside world completely. I've been stockpiling supplies, canned food, firewood, ammunition. I should have everything I need. But sometimes, when the wind blows hard against the cabin walls at night, it sounds almost like voices. Sometimes I swear I hear my name being called from the darkness beyond my windows. And sometimes, just before dawn, when the forest is at its darkest, I feel like something is watching me, waiting. Maybe my uncle wasn't suffering from dementia after all. Maybe there was a reason he wrote those things in his journals. Maybe there's something in these woods, or maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the one losing my grip on reality. After all, grief can do strange things to a person's mind. I should know. I used to teach my students about that before the fire. Either way, I'm going to find out. I have nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. This place, this isolated cabin in the endless pines, is my sanctuary now, or my prison. Sometimes I can't tell the difference anymore. The first snow came yesterday, covering everything in, a blanket of white. It fell thick and heavy, piling up against the cabin walls and weighing down the branches of the pines. The road to town disappeared completely. Now, it's just me and Max in this wooden box, surrounded by a frozen wilderness. My only link to the outside world is the ham radio I managed to fix last week. It works, sort of. The signal comes and goes, crackling with static. Most days, I can't pick up anything but weather reports and occasional chatter from truckers passing on the distant highway. But last night, something strange happened. I was half asleep, in my chair by the fire when the radio suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, I heard a woman's voice, not just any woman. Sarah, my wife, my dead wife. Richard, the voice said. Why did you leave us? I knocked over my coffee mug, scrambling to turn up the volume, but by then there was nothing but static. I stayed up all night listening, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The voice didn't come back. I'm not crazy. I know what I heard, but I also know it's impossible. Sarah is gone. They're all gone. I watched them lower 3 coffins into the ground. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, or maybe someone on another frequency happened to say my name. That makes more sense. It has to, but that's not the only strange thing happening in this place. 3 nights ago, I woke up to whispering, not outside, but inside the cabin, coming from the very walls themselves. Soft at first, then growing louder. Words I couldn't quite make out, like a conversation heard through a thick door. When I got up to investigate, they stopped. As soon as I laid back down, they started again. This went on for hours until dawn finally broke, and they faded away with the darkness. Last week, while searching for more firewood in the crawl space beneath the cabin, I found a locked wooden chest. Inside were dozens of strange objects. Knives with carved bone handles, a revolver loaded with silver bullets, and what looked like charms woven from pine needles into intricate patterns. The same patterns from my uncle's journals, the same pattern I found carved into that tree. Why would my uncle hide weapons under his floor? What was he afraid of? The blizzard hit 2 days ago. The wind howled like a living thing, shaking the cabin so hard I thought it might tear apart. I stayed up watching the storm through the window, the lantern turned low to save oil. That's when I saw them. Standing in the clearing around my cabin were figures. Tall figures, at least 7 feet high, thin as saplings. They didn't move, even as the wind whipped snow around them. They just stood there, facing the cabin. I counted 5 before I backed away from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I worked up the courage to look again, they were gone. Just smooth, unbroken snow where they had stood. No footprints leading away. Nothing. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the storm playing with my vision. But deep down, I knew better. Something even stranger happened this morning. I've been keeping careful track of my food supplies, marking everything down in a notebook. According to my count, I should have had 12 cans of beans left. Now there are only 8. The door was locked all night. The windows too. Max didn't bark. Nothing was broken or forced open. So how did 4 cans of beans simply vanish? And then there was the deer. I found it this morning about 50 yards from the cabin. At first, I thought a wolf had gotten it. The snow was stained red, and the carcass had been torn apart. But as I got closer, I realized this wasn't the work of any predator I know. The deer had been dissected. That's the only word for it. Cut open with surgical precision. Specific organs had been removed. The heart, the liver, the eyes, the rest was arranged in a perfect circle, the bones positioned like the spokes of a wheel. No animal does that, not even humans, unless they're deeply disturbed. I've been reading more of my uncle's journals. The entries from his last winter here are frantic, the handwriting almost illegible in places. He writes about the tall ones who can bend space between trees. He claims they've been watching him for months, testing the boundaries of his sanctuary, looking for weaknesses. In the final entry, dated March 17th, 1967, he wrote simply, "They're coming tonight. God forgive me. There's something else that's bothering me. My watch keeps losing time, not just a few minutes here and there, but hours. The grandfather clock in the living room runs too fast. When I set both to the correct time before bed, by morning they're hours apart. Today I could have sworn it was only noon when the sun started to set. But that's impossible in winter. It's as if time itself is warping around this place. The storm still rages outside, the snow piling higher against the cabin. I'm not sure I could make it to town now, even if I wanted to. So I wait, and I listen to the radio, hoping for a voice, any voice that isn't from beyond the grave." The knock came just after midnight. 3 sharp raps on the front door that jolted me awake from where I'd fallen asleep in my chair. Max was on his feet instantly, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. No one should be out in this weather. No one could survive the trek through these woods in a blizzard. I grabbed my uncle's revolver from under my pillow and approached. The door slowly. "Who's there?" I called. "Please," came a man's voice, weak and shivering. "I'm lost. My car went off the road miles back. I saw your light. Please help me." I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Max's growl had grown louder. "If you don't open up, I'll die out here," the voice said. I thought about the tall figures in the snow, about the whispering walls and the missing food, about my uncle's warnings, but I couldn't let someone freeze to death on my doorstep. I couldn't have another death on my conscience. I opened the door. A man stood there, covered in snow, shivering violently. He was tall, but not unnaturally so. Normal, human. His face was pale from cold, his lips tinged blue. "Thank you," he gasped, stumbling inside as I moved back. "I thought I was going to die out there." Max backed away, still growling, his eyes never leaving our visitor. "My name's Walker," the man said, extending a trembling hand. As I reached out to shake it, I noticed something odd about his movements. They were smooth, too smooth for someone supposedly suffering from hypothermia. And though his clothes were covered in snow, they were completely dry underneath. Something wasn't right about Walker. Something wasn't right at all. I led Walker to the fireplace and offered him a blanket, which he took with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Max wouldn't stop growling, so I had to lock him in the bedroom. Even through the door, I could hear him scratching and whining. He'd never acted this way around a stranger before. "That's a nice cabin you've got here, Richard," Walker said, warming his hands by the fire. "Been in your family long?" I froze. I hadn't told him my name. "How do you know who I am?" I asked. Walker's smile widened. "You told me when you opened the door, don't you remember?" I hadn't, I was sure of it, but maybe I had and forgotten. Stress does strange things to memory, and I haven't exactly been myself lately. The cabin belonged to my uncle, I said carefully. I inherited it recently. Ah, yes, old Tom Holloway, Walker nodded. He was quite a character. You knew my uncle? Everyone around these parts knew Tom. He was interesting, especially toward the end. The way he said the end made my skin crawl. I decided to change the subject. You said your car went off the road? Where exactly? Walker stared into the fire. About 5 miles back. Hit a patch of ice, ended up in a ditch. He looked up at me. I was lucky to find your cabin. Not many people out this way. No, I agreed. There aren't. Must be lonely, he said, studying me with eyes that seemed too dark in the firelight. Especially after losing your family like that. The fire wasn't a terrible thing. My blood went cold. I had never mentioned my family or how they died. How could you possibly know about that? I demanded. Walker's face changed, just for a second. It seemed to shift, like something else was trying to push through from underneath. You must have told me, he said smoothly. Or perhaps I heard it in town before the storm. News travels, fast in small places. I wanted to throw him out right then, but the blizzard was still raging, and something told me it would be more dangerous to make him leave than to let him stay. At least inside the cabin I could watch him. You can sleep on the couch, I said. We'll try to get you back to town when the storm breaks. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair across from Walker's sleeping form, the revolver in my lap. Sometime past midnight, I noticed he wasn't breathing. His chest didn't rise or fall. But when I leaned closer to check, his eyes snapped open, and he smiled at me. Can't sleep, Richard. I mumbled something about checking the fire and retreated to the kitchen. Through the window, I could see that the snow had stopped falling and the clouds had cleared to reveal a full moon. Its light reflected off the snow, making the clearing around the cabin as bright as day. That's when I realized Max had gone quiet. I rushed to the bedroom and flung open the door. Empty. The window was intact. The door had been locked, but my dog was gone. Impossible unless I ran outside in my slippers, following a trail of paw prints in the fresh snow. They led toward the forest, then stopped abruptly in the middle of the clearing. Just stopped, as if Max had vanished into thin air. Max, I called, my voice echoing through the silent trees. Max, come here, boy. Nothing. I spent the next hour searching, calling until my voice was hoarse. Eventually, I had to go back inside before frostbite set in. Walker was sitting by the fire, exactly as I'd left him. Did you find your dog? He asked pleasantly. I didn't answer. Instead, I went to the kitchen and poured myself a drink with shaking hands. When I returned to the living room, Walker was gone. The front door was still locked from the inside. I searched every room, but he had vanished just like Max. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then I remembered. Walker, Max, the footprints that ended in the middle of nowhere. I dressed quickly and went outside to search for Max again. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The trees had moved. I don't mean they'd been cut down or planted elsewhere. I mean the actual position of the forest had changed overnight. A path I'd walked 100 times now led to a sheer rock face that had never been there before. A small grove I used for target practice was simply gone, replaced by a stand of trees that looked centuries old. I tried to find my way to the main road, but after an hour of walking, I somehow ended up back at the cabin again. It was as if the forest itself was shifting around me, keeping me trapped in a maze where all paths led home. The radio started picking up transmissions again that afternoon. Not Sarah's voice this time, but the high-pitched laughter of children. My children. Emily's giggle and Jason's belly laugh, sounds I never thought I'd hear again. Daddy! Emily's voice crackled through the static. "Why won't you help us? We're so cold, Daddy." "The tall man is coming," Jason's voice whispered. "He's almost here." I threw the radio across the room, shattering it against the wall. But I could still hear their voices, fainter now, coming from somewhere inside the cabin itself. That evening, while searching for Walker or any sign of where he might have gone, I found a loose floorboard in the guest room. Beneath it was a small metal box containing old photographs, black and white images of my uncle standing in front of the cabin, looking much younger than I ever knew him. And beside him in every photo was Walker, looking exactly the same as he does now. The most recent photo was dated 1932, 93 years ago. Walker hasn't aged a day. Time is behaving strangely in other ways too. Yesterday, at least I think it was yesterday, I started cutting firewood at dawn. I raised the axe for the first swing, and suddenly it was midnight. The wood was all chopped and stacked neatly, but I have no memory of doing it. 12 hours, gone in the blink of an eye. The day after that, I spent what felt like hours making breakfast, but when I checked the clock, only 3 minutes had passed. It's as if time is stretching and contracting like a rubber band. The blizzard returned last night, worse than before. The snow fell so hard, it was like a solid white wall outside the windows, but near the edge of the forest, in one specific spot, the snow wasn't falling down. It was falling up, rising from the ground to disappear into the clouds. I rubbed my eyes, certain I was seeing things, but it continued. A reverse waterfall of snow in perfect defiance of gravity. Walker returned, this morning, walking in through the front door as if he'd just stepped out for a moment. Max trotted in behind him, perfectly healthy and normal. When I rushed to check my dog for injuries, he licked my face affectionately, showing no signs of fear or distress. "Where have you been?" I demanded, looking from Walker to Max. "What did you do to my dog?" "Your dog wandered into the forest," Walker said calmly. "I went to find him for you. Isn't that kind of me?" "That was 3 days ago." Walker tilted his head, looking confused. "No, Richard. It was just this morning. Maybe you fell asleep?" "I know how long my dog was missing," I said through gritted teeth. "Just like I know you disappeared from a locked cabin. Just like I know you're in photographs with my uncle from 1932. Just like I know you somehow knew about my family without me telling you." Walker's face changed again. That same momentary shift, like something else was looking out through a mask. "Your family," he said softly. "Did you ever wonder why you weren't home that night, Richard? Why, out of all nights, you decided to work? Late at the university on that particular evening?" My breath caught in my throat. "What are you saying?" "The fire wasn't an accident," Walker whispered, his voice no longer human, but a dry rustling like dead leaves. "Deep down, you've always known that." I backed away, reaching for the revolver I'd left on the side table, but it was gone. Walker stood perfectly still, watching me with eyes that had grown too large, too dark. "What are you?" I whispered. Walker smiled, his mouth stretching wider than any human mouth should. "I think you know, Professor. It's time you stopped pretending." The cabin suddenly felt wrong. The walls seemed to bend inward, the ceiling higher than it should be. When I tried to go to the kitchen, I ended up in the bedroom instead. Doors that should have led outside opened onto closets. The hallway stretched, impossibly long, then contracted to almost nothing. I stumbled back to the living room to find Walker gone again. But on the wall, where there had only ever been a hunting trophy, now hung a large photograph of my family. Sarah, Emily, and Jason, smiling out at me from a picture I'd never taken. As I watched in horror, their faces began to melt like wax. In a fire, I woke up on the floor of the living room with sunlight streaming through the windows. For a moment, I thought everything, Walker, the moving forest, the melting photograph, had been a terrible nightmare. But then I saw the muddy footprints leading from the guest room to the front door. Not normal footprints. They were huge, nearly twice the size of my own, and oddly shaped, as if whoever made them had too many toes. The protective charms I'd found in my uncle's chest and hung around the cabin were all destroyed. The woven pine needle symbols had been snapped in half, the silver bullets removed from the revolver and bent like they were made of clay. Max was cowering under my bed, whimpering. It took nearly an hour to coax him out, and even then he stayed glued to my side, jumping at every little sound. I had to find Walker. I had to understand what was happening. I grabbed my rifle, made sure it was loaded, and headed into the forest in the direction the footprints led. The woods felt different today, darker despite the bright winter sun overhead. The usual forest sounds were missing. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just a heavy silence that seemed to press against my ears. I walked, for what felt like hours, following a trail that seemed to shift and change. Just when I thought I was hopelessly lost, I stumbled into a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center stood a circle of standing stones, each about the height of a man, arranged like a clock face. The stones were covered in carvings, the same symbols from my uncle's journals, the same mark I'd found on that tree trunk. The ground around the circle was bare, no snow, no plants, not even a blade of grass. Just hard-packed dirt that didn't look like it had seen rain or sunlight in years. But the trees around the clearing were the strangest part. They were dead, petrified. Wood, like ancient fossils that should be in a museum. Yet somehow they were swaying slightly, even though there wasn't a breath of wind. As I stood there, the temperature began to drop. My breath clouded in front of me, then froze in mid-air and fell to the ground like tiny ice crystals. The sunlight dimmed as if something huge had passed between the earth and the sun. "Richard," the voice came from the edge of the clearing. Sarah's voice. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. She stood there at the edge of the tree line. My wife, just as beautiful as the day I lost her. But something was wrong. Her movements were jerky, like a puppet, on strings. Her skin was too pale, almost blue. And her eyes were completely black. "Sarah," I whispered, taking a step forward. "Why did you let us burn, Richard?" she asked, her mouth moving wrong, like it wasn't synced with her words. "Why weren't you there?" "I'm sorry," I said, tears freezing on my cheeks. "I'm so sorry." "It's not too late," she said, extending a hand toward me. "You can still join us. We're all waiting for you." I wanted to go to her. God help me, I almost did. But then Max, who had followed me into the forest, began to growl, a sound of pure animal terror that snapped me back to my senses. Sarah's form flickered like a bad TV signal. For just a second, I saw what was really standing there. A towering skeletal creature with skin like bark and antlers branching from its skull. I raised my rifle, but before I could fire, the temperature dropped even further. The air itself seemed to crack with cold. From between the petrified trees, they emerged. 7 of them. Tall, impossibly thin figures with limbs like branches and faces that were just wrong. They moved in a way that hurt my eyes to watch, as if they were sliding between moments of time. "The Wendigo," I whispered, the word coming to me from my uncle's journals. "Very good, Professor," said Walker's voice from behind me. I spun around. He was standing in the center of the stone circle, but he didn't look human anymore. His skin hung loose like an ill-fitting suit. Behind him, more of the creatures emerged, gliding between the stones. "What have you done with my wife?" I demanded. "My children?" "Nothing," Walker said, his face stretching into that too wide smile. "They burned to ash 3 years ago. What you just saw was merely, let's call it a puppet. We're very good at making them." "Why are you doing this to me?" I asked, my rifle trained on him, though I knew instinctively it wouldn't do any good. "Because you're perfect," Walker said, taking a step forward. His movements were all wrong now, boneless and fluid. Grief-stricken, isolated, intelligent enough. to understand what's happening, but broken enough to doubt your own mind. We've been preparing you for months. Preparing me for what? Consumption. The word was spoken by all the creatures at once, their voices layered like a horrible chorus. We feed on grief and madness. The more aware our prey is of their fate, the sweeter the meal. You've been driving me insane, I realized. No, Richard, we've been revealing the truth to you, one piece at a time. That's much more effective. Something clicked in my mind. My uncle. What happened to him? Walker's smile stretched wider. He's still here. Part of him anyway. We don't waste anything. One of the creatures stepped forward, its movements like stuttering film frames. It opened what I guess was its mouth, and I heard my uncle's voice, distant and echoing, as if from the bottom of a well. Run, Richard. They can only take you. If you give up, don't give up. The creature snapped its jaw shut, cutting off the voice. Walker sighed, the sound like wind through dead branches. Some parts of the consciousness remain stubborn, even after all these decades. You kept him alive for 40 years? Time is fluid for us. We exist in the thin places between worlds. What feels like decades to you is merely a pleasant afternoon. And for us, the creatures began to close in, forming a tighter circle around me. Max was snarling, his fur standing on end, but he was shaking with fear. Your uncle nearly escaped, Walker continued. He learned some of our weaknesses from the indigenous people who once lived here, the ones who knew to fear the forest. That's why we had to be more careful with you. We've been watching you since the moment you inherited the cabin. We even arranged the fire that brought you to us. What? My hands went numb with shock. You caused the fire? How else could we ensure? You'd flee to the perfect isolation we needed. Grief is a powerful motivator. It makes humans do all sorts of irrational things, like moving to a cabin in the woods where their uncle mysteriously vanished. Sarah's form appeared again at the edge of the clearing, but now I could see the strings, literal glowing threads, connecting her to the creature's fingers like a marionette. We've been feeding on your pain for months, Walker said, but now we're hungry for more than just your grief. We want your mind, your memories, your soul, if such things exist. The creatures moved closer, their bodies shifting and changing, growing taller, thinner, their limbs stretching like taffy. The air crackled with a strange energy that made my fillings hurt. Why are you telling me all this? I asked, backing away until I felt the rough surface of one of the standing stones against my back. Walker's face split open, revealing rows of teeth like needles. Because fear makes the meal so much sweeter. Knowing is half the torture. I fired the rifle. The bullet passed right through Walker's chest without leaving a mark. We're not physically here in the way you understand, he said, almost gently. We exist in between. You can't hurt us with toys like that. The sky darkened as if night had fallen in seconds. The standing stones began to glow with a sickly green light, illuminating the clearing with shadows that moved independently of their owners. Your uncle lasted 40 years, Walker said, reaching for me with a hand that now ended in long, curved talons. I wonder how long you'll last. I grabbed Max by the collar and ran. I ran as if all the demons of hell were behind me. And maybe I've been reading more of my uncle's journals. The entries from his last winter here are frantic, the handwriting almost illegible in places. He writes about the tall ones who can bend space between trees. He claims they've been watching him for months, testing the boundaries of his sanctuary, looking for weaknesses. In the final entry, dated March 17th, 1967, he wrote simply, "They're coming tonight. God forgive me. There's something else that's bothering me. My watch keeps losing time, not just a few minutes here and there, but hours. The grandfather clock in the living room runs too fast. When I set both to the correct time before bed, by morning they're hours apart. Today I could have sworn it was only noon when the sun started to set. But that's impossible in winter. It's as if time itself is warping around this place. The storm still rages outside, the snow piling higher against the cabin. I'm not sure I could make it to town now, even if I wanted to. So I wait, and I listen to the radio, hoping for a voice, any voice that isn't from beyond the grave. The knock came just after midnight. 3 sharp raps on the front door that jolted me awake from where I'd fallen asleep in my chair. Max was on his feet instantly, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. No one should be out in this weather. No one could survive the trek through these woods in a blizzard. I grabbed my uncle's revolver from under my pillow and approached. The door slowly. "Who's there?" I called. "Please," came a man's voice, weak and shivering. "I'm lost. My car went off the road miles back. I saw your light. Please help me." I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Max's growl had grown louder. "If you don't open up, I'll die out here," the voice said. I thought about the tall figures in the snow, about the whispering walls and the missing food, about my uncle's warnings, but I couldn't let someone freeze to death on my doorstep. I couldn't have another death on my conscience. I opened the door. A man stood there, covered in snow, shivering violently. He was tall, but not unnaturally so. Normal, human. His face was pale from cold, his lips tinged blue. "Thank you," he gasped, stumbling inside as I moved back. "I thought I was going to die out there." Max backed away, still growling, his eyes never leaving our visitor. "My name's Walker," the man said, extending a trembling hand. As I reached out to shake it, I noticed something odd about his movements. They were smooth, too smooth for someone supposedly suffering from hypothermia, and though his clothes were covered in snow, they were completely dry underneath. Something wasn't right about Walker. Something wasn't right at all. I led Walker to the fireplace and offered him a blanket, which he took with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Max wouldn't stop growling, so I had to lock him in the bedroom. Even through the door, I could hear him scratching and whining. He'd never acted this way around a stranger before. "That's a nice cabin you've got here, Richard," Walker said, warming his hands by the fire. "Been in your family long?" I froze. I hadn't told him my name. "How do you know who I am?" I asked. Walker's smile widened. "You told me when you opened the door. Don't you remember?" I hadn't, I was sure of it, but maybe I had and forgotten. Stress does strange things to memory, and I haven't exactly been myself lately. "The cabin belonged to my uncle," I said carefully. "I inherited it recently." "Ah, yes, old Tom Holloway," Walker nodded. "He was quite a character." "You knew my uncle?" "Everyone around these parts knew Tom. He was interesting, especially toward the end. The way he said the end made my skin crawl. I decided to change the subject. "You said your car went off the road? Where exactly?" Walker stared into the fire. "About 5 miles back. Hit a patch of ice, ended up in a ditch." He looked up at me. "I was lucky to find your cabin. Not many people out this way." "No," I agreed. "There aren't." "Must be lonely," he said, studying me with eyes that seemed too dark in the firelight. "Especially after losing your family like that. The fire wasn't a terrible thing." My blood went cold. I had never mentioned my family or how they died. How could you possibly know about that? I demanded. Walker's face changed, just for a second. It seemed to shift, like something else was trying to push through from underneath. "You must have told me," he said smoothly. "Or perhaps I heard it in town before the storm. News travels, fast in small places." I wanted to throw him out right then, but the blizzard was still raging, and something told me it would be more dangerous to make him leave than to let him stay. At least inside the cabin I could watch him. "You can sleep on the couch," I said. "We'll try to get you back to town when the storm breaks." Understanding washed over me. The Wendigo hadn't just been feeding on my grief, they'd been nurturing my hope as well. the voices on the radio, the glimpses of my family. They wanted me to hope I could see them again, even as they terrified me with their presence. Hope and fear, two sides of the same coin, both powerful emotions that kept me trapped. "You can't have me," I said aloud, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I know what you are now. I know how you work." The bleeding walls pulsed in response. Outside, the voices of my loved ones turned to screams begging me to save them. "My family is dead," I continued. "They're not coming back, and I accept that." The screaming grew louder, more desperate. "You didn't cause the fire," I realized suddenly. "You couldn't have. You were just taking advantage of my grief, making me think you were all-powerful, making me blame myself even more than I already did." The cabin shuddered as if struck by an earthquake. The salt circle remained intact, but the iron nails began to glow red-hot, smoking where they entered the wood. Through the window, I could see the sky beginning to lighten. Dawn was approaching. If my uncle was right, I just needed to hold on a little longer. That's when Walker came through the wall, not through a door or window, but literally through the solid wall, as if it were no more substantial than fog. He wasn't pretending to be human anymore. His body was stretched and twisted, his skin like bark, his fingers ending in foot-long talons. Behind him came others, their forms blurring and shifting like bad television reception. "Clever, Professor," Walker said, his voice echoing as if coming from multiple throats. "But not clever enough. Your uncle's barriers can't help you now. We've grown stronger since his time." They began to circle me, moving in that jerky, wrong way that hurt my eyes. They passed through the salt line as if it wasn't there. The iron nails were now melting into the floor, the red string burning away to ash. "You're right about one thing," Walker continued. "Hope and fear are our sustenance. But do you know what's even more delicious?" He leaned in close, his breath like cemetery dirt. "Surrender." I looked around frantically. The light outside was growing stronger, but too slowly. The creatures were almost upon me. Then I remembered something else from my uncle's journal. A passage that had seemed like nonsense at the time. "They have rules. They can take, but they cannot steal. They must be invited." "That's it, isn't it?" I said, backing away until I hit the wall. "You can only take what's offered. You need me to give up, to surrender. That's why you've been torturing me instead of just killing me outright." Walker's head tilted at an impossible angle. "Very good. But it doesn't matter if you understand. In the end, everyone breaks. Everyone surrenders." I was trapped. The sunrise was still minutes away. The creatures were closing in, their forms growing larger, more solid, as night gave its last gasp. "You're right," I said, lowering the revolver. "I give up." Walker's mouth stretched into that horrible grin. "Finally." "But not to you," I continued. "I surrender to the truth. My family is gone. The fire was an accident. Nothing can bring them back, not even you." I raised the gun again, but instead of aiming at Walker, I aimed at the ceiling, at the oil lamp hanging there. I fired once, the bullet shattering the glass reservoir. Burning oil rained down, igniting the wooden floor immediately. The creatures shrieked, a sound like metal tearing. They backed away from the flames, their forms wavering. Fire! They feared fire. Of course they did. Fire purifies. Fire transforms. Fire represents everything they are not. Light, warmth, life. "You can't have me," I repeated, grabbing Max and backing toward the door. "And I won't spend the rest of my life afraid of you." The cabin was catching quickly, the old dry wood going up like kindling. The creatures tried to follow us, but the flames formed a barrier they couldn't cross. In the growing light of dawn, their bodies seemed less solid, more like smoke. Max and I burst out into the snowy clearing. The eastern sky was painted with the first orange streaks of sunrise. In the woods, I could see the tall figures retreating, sliding between trees, their forms fading as daylight strengthened. The cabin burned behind us, years of fear and grief going up in smoke. I knew the creatures would return with the night. This wasn't over, but for the first time since I'd arrived in this place, I felt something like clarity. I looked down at Max, who stared up at me with trusting eyes. "Come on, boy," I said. "Let's go find the road." As we walked away from the burning cabin, I felt something lift from my shoulders, a weight I'd been carrying since the night of the fire. I might never fully escape the Wendigo. Part of me might always be trapped in these woods, just like my uncle. But I wasn't going to surrender, not today. The forest tried to confuse us, paths shifting and changing, but I kept the rising sun directly ahead, and eventually the trees began to thin. In the distance I could see what looked like a road, a real road that would lead to town, to people, to safety. Behind us, something let out a long, hollow cry of frustration, a sound that echoed through the trees and raised goosebumps on my skin. Max whined and pressed against my leg. "It's okay," I told him, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "We're going to be okay." As we reached the road, I looked back one last time. At the edge of the forest stood a single figure, not Walker, not one of the Wendigo, but my uncle. He looked young, the way he had in those old photographs. He raised his hand in a solemn salute, then turned and walked back into the trees, fading like morning mist. Was he real? A final trick of the Wendigo? Or something else? A piece of his consciousness that had finally broken free after all these decades? I didn't know. Maybe I never would. Max barked, drawing my attention back to the road. In the distance, I could see the lights of an approaching truck. I stepped out and waved my arms. As the truck slowed, I wondered what I would tell the driver, how much I would share, how much I would keep to myself, but those were questions for later. For now, all that mattered was that we were alive, we were free, and the sun was rising on a new day. Whether the Wendigo would find me again someday, whether part of me would always be watching for tall figures between the trees, that was a fear for tomorrow. Today I had survived. Today I had refused to surrender, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. My name is Evelyn Monroe. I used to be Dr. Monroe to my students and colleagues, but that feels like a lifetime ago now. These days, it's just Evelyn, alone with my notebooks and water samples in this tiny cabin overlooking a lake no one seems to care about. Well, no one except me, and maybe the locals who avoid it like it's cursed. I drove into the Ozarks 3 weeks ago with everything I own packed in my Jeep. Not much to show for a 45-year-old woman with a PhD and 15 years of research experience. But when you're the scientist who published flawed data about industrial pollutants in the Great Lakes, opportunities dry up fast. Nobody wants to hire the woman who got bullied into retracting her findings when the big chemical companies came knocking. So here I am, studying this man-made lake in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. My last chance to prove I'm still worth something in my field. The cabin is basic but functional. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and what I've turned into a makeshift lab with my microscopes and testing equipment. The front porch faces the water, and sometimes when I sit out there at sunset, I almost feel at peace. Almost. This lake isn't like any I've studied before. On paper, it's simple enough. Created in the 1950s when they dammed the river valley and flooded an old mining town. But there's something off about it. The locals call it the dead spot, though there's plenty of life here, just not the right kind. I noticed it my first day on the water. I'd hired a local man named Jack Haskell to take me out in his fishing boat. Gruff guy, probably in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who's spent his life outdoors. He didn't say much until we reached the middle of the lake. "We should turn back," he said suddenly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I looked around, confused. The lake was calm, the sky clear. "Why?" "I need to take samples from the center." Jack pointed to a circular area of water ahead of us. It looked slightly darker than the rest. though that could have been a shadow from the clouds. Nobody fishes there, he said quietly. Boats disappear. I laughed, thinking he was pulling the city girl's leg. Boats can't just disappear, Mr. Haskell. He didn't laugh back. Suit yourself, but I'm not crossing that line. I wanted to argue, but it was his boat. So we circled around, taking samples from everywhere else. The whole time, I kept looking at that dark spot, wondering what silly superstition kept these people away from it. The next day, I took my own small inflatable boat out. I wasn't going to let some backwoods folklore get in the way of my research. I rowed straight for the center of the lake, my depth finder beeping steadily beside me. As I crossed into what the locals avoided, the first strange thing happened. My depth finder went crazy, jumping from 60 feet to 180, then to 320. That was impossible. According to the geological surveys I'd studied, this lake was no deeper than 80 feet at its maximum. I dropped a weighted line. It went down and down and down and never seemed to hit bottom. I pulled it back up, my hands shaking slightly. Something wasn't right. That night in my lab, I examined the water samples under my microscope and found the second impossible thing. The microorganisms in the water from the center didn't match anything in my reference books. They moved wrong, shaped wrong, reacted wrong when I introduced standard testing chemicals. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that dark circle of water and what might be underneath. I dreamed of buildings beneath the surface, perfectly preserved. Streets where people once walked, now covered in silt and fish. And in the dream, something moved in the old mining tunnels, something big and patient that had been waiting a very long time. The next morning I called Jack Haskell again. I need to go back out, I told him, and I need to bring my scuba gear. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "Your funeral," and hung up. He picked me up at the dock an hour later, eyeing my equipment with clear disapproval. "You know," he said as we headed out, "my daddy worked construction on the dam project, said there were protests about flooding the valley. Not because of the town, it was mostly abandoned by then, but because of what the miners found down in the deepest shaft." "What did they find?" I asked, checking my air tanks. Jack shrugged. "Nobody would say exactly. But the mining company shut down operations overnight, paid everyone 3 months' salary to keep quiet and leave. Then 2 years later, the government shows up wanting to dam the river and drown the whole place." I wanted to dismiss it as more local superstition, but scientists are supposed to consider all data points. And everything about this lake was adding up to something very strange. Jack stopped the boat at the edge of the dark circle. "This is as far as I go. I'll wait 1 hour. If you're not back by then..." He didn't finish the sentence. I put on my mask and flippers, checked my equipment one last time, and rolled backward into the water. The visibility was surprisingly good for a lake. I could see about 20 feet in any direction. I descended slowly, following my dive computer. 30 feet, 50 feet, 70 feet. Around me, normal lake fish swam, seemingly unbothered by my presence. At 80 feet, everything changed. The water temperature dropped suddenly. The light dimmed even, with my powerful dive light, and I felt something, a vibration in the water, almost like a deep subsonic hum. My dive computer flickered, and then the display went dead. I should have turned back then. Any sane person would have. But I kept going deeper, drawn by scientific curiosity and maybe something else I couldn't name. At what I guessed was about 100 feet, I saw the first sign of the town below, the top of a church steeple emerging from the silt. It shouldn't have been intact after decades underwater. The wood should have rotted, the structure collapsed, but it looked almost new. That's when I saw the movement. Something massive shifted in the darkness beyond my light's reach, something that blocked out even the murky light filtering down from above. I caught only a glimpse, a shape that made no sense to my brain, moving in ways that seemed to bend the water around it. I panicked, dropping my sample container, and kicked hard for the surface. The whole way up, I felt like something was following me just at the edge of my vision. My heart was hammering in my chest, burning through my oxygen far too quickly. When I broke the surface, Jack was standing ready in his boat, looking more afraid than I felt. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked as he helped me aboard. I was shivering uncontrollably, partly from the cold, deep water, partly from something else. "Saw what?" I managed to ask. "Whatever's down there. The thing that's not supposed to be." I didn't answer. I couldn't process what I'd seen. It didn't fit into any scientific framework I knew. Instead, I focused on the samples I'd managed to collect before dropping my container. Back at my cabin lab that night, I found the third impossible thing. The water from the deep part of the lake contained trace elements that shouldn't exist. In nature, compounds I couldn't identify that seemed to change their properties while I was observing them. I spent the next few days mapping the lake with sonar from my inflatable boat. Every time I crossed into the dark circle, my equipment failed. Batteries drained instantly. Electronics went haywire. But before they died, they showed depth readings that were off the charts. 600 feet, 800 feet, deeper than the surrounding. Geography should allow. I also noticed something else strange. Gas bubbles rising from the depths. But not in the random patterns they should form naturally. These bubbles came up in perfect geometric shapes. Triangles, squares, hexagons, as if something was deliberately releasing them in these formations. A week after my dive, I was collecting samples along the shoreline when I met a young girl skipping stones. She couldn't have been more than 10. "You shouldn't drink the water," she said, watching me fill my containers. "I'm not drinking it," I assured her. "I'm studying it. My grandma says the water devils live in the deep part." I smiled. "Water devils?" She nodded solemnly. "They were here before the lake, before the town. The old people knew about them and stayed away. But then the miners dug too deep." "What happened then?" I asked, humoring her. "They had to flood everything to keep them from getting out." She threw another stone, watching it bounce 5 times across the surface. "But Grandma says they're getting stronger. She says they're learning how to swim up." The girl skipped away before I could ask anything else, leaving me with a chill that had nothing to do with the water lapping at my boots. That night, I dreamed again of the submerged town. But this time, I wasn't just watching it. I was walking through the streets, breathing water as easily as air. The buildings were perfectly preserved, but different somehow. Angles that didn't quite make sense, doorways that seemed to lead into darkness that went on forever. And in the center of town, where the mine entrance should be, something was, pulsing with a blue-green light that called to me like a beacon. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. The digital clock by my bed was flashing random numbers, and there was a puddle of water on the floor, water that hadn't been there. When I went to sleep, I'm a scientist. I believe in what I can measure, what I can prove, but sitting there in the dark, listening to the lap of the lake water against the shore below my cabin, I had to admit that whatever was happening here went beyond anything my education had prepared me for. Tomorrow I'll go back to the lake. I'll take more samples. I'll run more tests. I'll try to find a rational explanation for everything I've seen and felt, but deep down, I know the truth. Something is in that lake, something old and patient and intelligent, and somehow I think it's been waiting for me. It's been 2 weeks since my dive into the deep part of the lake. I've tried to stick to my normal research routine, but nothing feels normal anymore. This morning, I checked on the water samples I've been keeping in my makeshift lab. What I saw made me drop my coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, but I barely noticed. The tiny organisms in my samples were changing, growing, evolving. I've spent my whole career studying water creatures, and I know this isn't possible. Evolution takes thousands, millions of years, not days. But there they were, under my microscope. Organisms that yesterday had simple structures were now showing complex cell formations. Some even had primitive limbs developing. I took careful photos, documenting everything. If I ever make it back to the academic world, I'll need proof. Later that day I went fishing, not for food, but for specimens. The fish I caught weren't right. A small bass had strange growths along its side that looked almost like fingers. A catfish had eyes that seemed too aware. When I held it, it looked at me with something that felt like recognition. I released it quickly, my hands shaking. Jack Haskell stopped by my cabin that afternoon, bringing me some fresh vegetables from his garden. I think he's worried about me out here alone. Or maybe he's worried about what I might find. "You're looking tired, Dr. Monroe," he said, leaning against my porch railing, keeping his distance like he always does. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just busy with research." He nodded toward my notebook spread across the porch table. "Finding anything interesting?" I hesitated. "Jack knows this lake better than anyone, but how much should I tell him?" "The fish are showing some unusual adaptations," I said carefully, "like the three-eyed perch my nephew caught last spring." He said it casually, like it was a normal thing. "You've seen mutations before? Why didn't you tell me?" He shrugged. "Thought you'd figure it out yourself. Smart lady like you." Before he left, he paused. "You know, my grandfather was the last foreman at the mine before they closed it." My heart beat faster. "Did he ever tell you what they found down there?" Jack looked out at the lake, his face unreadable. "Not in so many words, but the night before they shut down operations, he came home soaking wet, though it hadn't rained. Kept saying they should have left it buried, said it wasn't meant for our world." What wasn't meant for our world? Don't know exactly, but he was. The one who pushed hardest to get the valley flooded afterward. Said water was the only thing that would keep it contained. After Jack left, I went through some local history books I'd borrowed from the tiny town library. Most were full of the usual folk tales, hauntings, strange lights, the normal stuff every small town collects over the years. But one thin, hand-bound book caught my attention. It was a collection of Ozark folk stories from the late 1800s, and it mentioned something called water devils, creatures that lived in the deep pools of rivers and called to miners with singing voices. According to the stories, they could change shape and would sometimes leave the water at night, stealing tools and moving things around. The stories were probably just ways to explain mishaps around dangerous mining operations. But they existed, long before this lake was created, before the mining town was even built. I stayed up late, updating my research notes. When I finally went to bed, I dreamed again of the submerged town. This time, I saw creatures swimming through the streets, things that were almost human but stretched and changed as they moved. They seemed to be searching for something, or someone. I woke at dawn to the sound of harmonic tones coming from the lake, like crystal glasses being rubbed with wet fingers, but deeper, more resonant. By the time I threw on clothes and ran down to the shore, the sounds had stopped. Back in my lab, I noticed something strange. My research notes from yesterday seemed different. Some of the measurements I'd recorded had changed. Numbers that I was certain had been 7.2 were now 8.6. Descriptions I'd written of simple cellular structures now described more complex formations. Had I made mistakes? Was I losing my mind? I decided to set up some controlled experiments. I placed water samples from different parts of the lake in sealed containers, carefully labeled with location, date, and time. I measured everything 3 times and took photos as backup. The next morning, all the labels were still in place, but when I checked the samples, several had changed position on my workbench. One container was empty, though still sealed. Another held what looked like tiny fragments of rock that hadn't been there before. I started keeping a spare set of notes locked in my car, away from the cabin and the lake water. That night, I heard The harmonic tones again. This time, I recorded them with my phone. When I played it back, I could almost make out patterns. Not quite music, but definitely not random noise either. I took temperature readings from the lake daily, and they made no sense. The deep parts should be coldest, but sometimes they registered warmer than the surface. The readings fluctuated wildly, defying the basic laws of thermodynamics I'd learned in undergraduate physics. On the night of the full moon, something even stranger happened. I was sitting on my porch, watching the moonlight on the water, when I noticed the shoreline looked wrong. The water level had risen at least 3 feet, covering parts of the beach that had been dry all month. There had been no rain, no dam release, nothing to explain the change. By morning, the water was back to normal, leaving a line of debris marking how high it had risen. I called the local Forest Service office to ask if they'd noticed the water level change. The ranger I spoke with seemed confused. Our monitoring station shows no significant change in the past month, he said. Are you sure about what you saw? I took photos the next full moon, when it happened again. The water rose slowly over the course of an hour, then receded before dawn. The Forest Service had no explanation. By the 5th week of my stay, things in my cabin started to move. I'd leave my coffee cup on the counter and find it in the sink. My keys would disappear from my pocket and turn up in my boot. Small things, easy to dismiss as forgetfulness. But then I found my watch, the waterproof dive watch I hadn't worn since my lake dive, sitting in a sample container, fully submerged. I know I'd left it in my dresser drawer. That night, I sat on my porch watching the lake surface. Just before midnight, bioluminescent patterns appeared on the water, blue-green swirls that slowly formed shapes. Not random algae bloom patterns, but perfect circles, spirals, and what looked like sequences of numbers. They pulsed with light for almost an hour, then faded. I tried to convince myself there was a scientific explanation. Maybe a rare algae, species reacting to moonlight, maybe chemical runoff from the old mine creating unusual reactions, but deep down, I knew better. The lake was trying to communicate, and somehow I was starting to understand. One morning, I woke to find my laptop open, though I was sure I'd closed it the night before. On the screen was a single document, a text file with a series of numbers. At first, I thought they were random. Then I realized they were GPS coordinates. Coordinates for a spot on the lakeshore I hadn't explored yet. I should have been terrified. I should have packed up and left. Any rational person would have. Instead, I put the coordinates into my phone's map app and followed them to a rocky part of the shoreline, half a mile from my cabin. The spot looked unremarkable. Just stones and scrubby trees leading down to the water. But as I got closer, I noticed one rock formation that seemed too regular, too structured to be natural. Behind it was a narrow opening, a cave entrance that would be underwater when the lake level rose during the full moon. I stood there for a long time, staring at that dark opening. Everything I'd seen and experienced over the past month told me not to go inside, but I also knew I wouldn't be able to sleep if I walked away now. I went back to my cabin for a flashlight, then returned to the cave. The entrance was tight, but I managed to squeeze through into a larger space beyond. The beam of my flashlight showed a tunnel sloping gently downward, its walls smooth and slightly damp. I followed it for what felt like forever, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. Finally, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam caught something on the wall, marks that at first looked like random scratches. But as I moved closer, I saw they were drawings. Carvings, actually, etched deep into the stone. They showed humanoid figures with elongated limbs and large eyes. Some were shown in water, others walking on land. And at the center was a circular design with the same spiral patterns I'd seen glowing on the lake surface. I reached out and touched, One of the carvings. The stone felt unusually warm, almost alive under my fingers. That's when I heard splashing from deeper in the cave. A sound like something large moving through shallow water, coming closer. I backed away from the wall, my flashlight beam dancing wildly as my hand shook. Something was in here with me, something that had perhaps been waiting for me to find this place. The splashing stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear my own heart pounding, and then a sound like breathing. Not human breathing, but slow and wet, like air bubbling through water. I turned and ran, my flashlight beam bouncing crazily off the walls. I didn't stop until I was outside again, gasping in the clean air, the sunlight on my face feeling like a blessing. That night, I dreamed of the carvings. In my dream, they moved and shifted, telling a story I almost understood, about creatures that lived in the deep parts of the earth before humans existed, about how they retreated further down when people came, hibernating in the darkness, about how the miners broke into their sleeping chamber and woke them after countless years. I woke with my sheets soaked in sweat, my heart racing, and I knew I wasn't safe anymore. The lake knew I had found the cave. Whatever lived in the water was aware of me now in a way it hadn't been before. As I sat in the dark, trying to calm my breathing, my phone lit up with a text message. The number was unknown. The message read, "We know what you found. Stay where you are. A team is coming to help. EPA, Environmental Response Unit." I'd never contacted the EPA. I hadn't told anyone about the cave. Someone else was watching the lake and watching me. I didn't sleep after getting that text message. I sat on my porch with a thermos of coffee, watching the sun rise over the lake. The water looked so normal in the morning light, peaceful, even beautiful. Hard to believe there was anything strange about it at all. Around 9 a.m., I heard vehicles coming up the gravel road to my cabin. 2 black SUVs with government plates parked in front, and 4 people got out, 3 men and a woman, all wearing dark blue windbreakers with EPA printed on the back. The woman stepped forward, hand extended. "Dr. Monroe, I'm Agent Karen, Williams Environmental Protection Agency. We spoke last night. I hadn't actually spoken to anyone, but I shook her hand anyway. What can I do for the EPA? We've been monitoring water quality in this region," she said smoothly. "Your research has come to our attention. We'd like to compare notes." Her smile was friendly, but it didn't reach her eyes. The men with her were scanning my cabin, the lake, even the sky, looking for something. One had his hand inside his jacket like maybe he was carrying a gun. Since when did EPA agents carry guns? I invited them in, because what choice did I have? They spread out in my small cabin, looking at everything. Agent Williams picked up one of my notebooks. "You've been documenting some unusual findings," she said, flipping through the pages. "Just standard limnology research," I said, trying to sound casual. "Though this lake does have some interesting qualities." "Such as?" I hesitated. "Unusual depth variations, some water chemistry anomalies." One of the men was examining my water samples, holding them up to the light. Another was looking through my laptop files without asking permission. "Have you observed any biological abnormalities?" Williams asked. "Mutations in local species? Unidentified organisms?" She knew. They all knew something about this lake. Why? Pretend otherwise? "What is this really about?" I asked. "You're not just monitoring water quality." Williams and the men exchanged glances. She sat down at my kitchen table, gesturing for me to join her. "Dr. Monroe, what do you know about military testing in this region during the 1950s? "Nothing," I admitted. "Was there testing here?" She nodded slowly. "After World War II, there were experiments. New compounds designed for various purposes. Some were tested in remote areas like this. You're saying the government contaminated this lake?" "Not exactly." Williams chose her words carefully. The lake didn't exist then. The testing was done in the mining area. Later, when certain effects were observed, the decision was made to flood the valley. My mind raced. You created the lake to contain something? That's classified information, Dr. Monroe. But I can tell you that we've been monitoring this site for decades. Your presence here has disrupted certain patterns. The man at my laptop called Williams over. They whispered together, looking at something on the screen. Her face hardened. You've been to the cave, she said when she returned. It wasn't a question. Yesterday, I admitted. How did you know about it? We have monitoring devices throughout the area. Williams leaned forward. What happened in the cave? I told her about finding the carvings, about the splashing sounds. I didn't mention my dreams or the strange happenings in my cabin. Something told me to keep those details to myself. Did you touch anything in the cave? One of the men asked sharply. Just the wall with the carvings. They all looked at each other again. Something passed between them. Concern, fear. We're going to need to take your research materials with us, Williams said, for analysis. Those are my personal notes, I protested. My equipment, you can't just take them. Actually, we can. She pulled out an official-looking document. This authorizes us to collect any materials related to potential environmental hazards. I can get a more specific warrant if you prefer, but that would involve local authorities. I assumed you'd want to keep this quiet. She was right about that. My academic reputation was already in tatters. If word got out that I was investigating water devils in Arkansas, I'd never work in science again. Fine, I said. Take what you need. But I want copies of everything. Of course, Williams said, though we both knew I'd never see those copies. While her team packed up my notes, samples, and equipment, Williams asked more questions. Had I noticed any health changes in myself? Unusual dreams, changes in sleep patterns? I lied and said no to everything. Something about her interest made me uneasy. As they prepared to leave, Williams handed me her card. Call me if you observe anything unusual. And Dr. Monroe, I'd avoid swimming in the lake if I were you. After they left, I felt oddly empty. 6 weeks of research gone. But maybe it was for the best. Maybe now I could pack up and leave this strange place behind. But I didn't leave. Instead, I drove into town to see Jack Haskell. I needed answers, and he was the only person I trusted somewhat. I found him at the small bait shop he ran just off the main road. When he saw me, he nodded like he'd been expecting me. The men in black came calling, didn't they? He asked as he closed the shop door and flipped the sign to closed. EPA agents, I corrected him. How did you know? They come around every few years, usually when someone notices something they shouldn't. Jack poured 2 cups of coffee from an ancient pot. What did you find? I told him about the cave and the carvings. I described the sounds I'd heard in the water. Jack was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, my family's lived here for 5 generations, always near water. My grandfather used to say we were chosen for it. Chosen? By who? Not who. What? Jack stared into his coffee cup. My grandfather found something in that mine. Something that spoke to him without words. Afterward he was different. Could hold his breath underwater for impossible lengths. Could sense storms coming days away. And the government knew about this? Jack nodded. They came and took over the mine. Ran their tests. Mixed their chemicals with whatever was already down there. That's when things got bad. Animals started changing. People started having strange dreams. Children went missing. A chill ran through me. Missing. 3 kids disappeared that summer. All last seen playing near the mine entrance. That's when my grandfather insisted they flood everything. Jack's eyes met mine. They found one of the kids 2 weeks later. In the river, miles downstream, alive but changed. Skin like fish scales in places, eyes too big for his face. He never spoke again. I thought of the mutations I'd seen in the lake fish, the accelerated evolution in my water samples. What happened to him? Government took him, paid the family to stay quiet. Jack took a long breath. Same thing they did with others over the years. Anyone who spent too much time in the water and started showing signs. Signs of what? Changing. I remembered the agent's questions about my health. Had they been looking for signs that I was changing too? There's more, Jack said quietly. The town records. They were altered after the flooding, but the original census shows something strange about the families who lived closest to the mine. What? Higher than normal rates of certain genetic markers, similar to what they found in my family. Like we were, compatible with whatever's down there, like we'd been prepared generation after generation. My scientific mind rebelled against what he was suggesting. That's not possible. Genetic selection would take hundreds of years, or thousands, Jack said. How long do you think that thing's been down there? Those cave drawings you found, they're not just decades old, or even centuries. They're ancient. I remembered the dreams I'd been having. The sense that the creatures under the lake had been waiting for something, for someone. My grandfather told me once, when he was dying and not so careful about keeping secrets anymore, Jack continued, that the government didn't create what's in the lake. They just woke it up and made it stronger. And now they can't put it back to sleep. As I drove back to my cabin, my mind was spinning. If even half of what Jack said was true, this went beyond anything I'd imagined. Not just strange evolutionary anomalies or chemical contamination, but something that defied scientific understanding. I was so distracted that I almost missed the second black SUV parked off the road, half hidden among the trees. As I passed, I caught a glimpse of a man with binoculars. They were watching me. Back at my cabin, I packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, my backup notes from the car, my laptop. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not with the EPA watching my every move. As I was about to leave, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Jack. Don't run. They'll just find you. Come back to the shop. Basement door in back. Code 1953. I hesitated. Could I trust Jack? Maybe he was working with them. But my gut said otherwise. I left my packed bag on the bed, a decoy in case they were watching, and slipped out the back window. I circled through the woods, avoiding the road, and made my way to Jack's shop as night fell. The basement door was hidden behind stacked fishing gear. I entered the code, 1953, the year they'd flooded the valley, and the door clicked open. The basement was larger than I expected and outfitted like a small lab. Equipment lined the walls, microscopes, testing kits, computers. Jack was waiting, along with an elderly man I hadn't seen before. This is Dr. Chen, Jack said. He's been studying the lake longer than anyone. Dr. Chen nodded to me. 47 years since I was recruited from graduate school to the original containment team. Containment team? I echoed. That's what we called ourselves, Dr. Chen said. Though observation would be more accurate. We've never really contained what's in the lake, just monitored its development. He led me to a wall covered with photos and charts, lake analysis data going back decades, images of fish and amphibians with progressive mutations, and pictures of people, ordinary-looking people labeled with codes instead of names. These are the human subjects, Dr. Chen explained. Individuals who showed compatibility markers and developed changes after exposure. I scanned the faces, stopping at one that looked familiar. This is my father, Jack said quietly. After his first transformation, the man in the photo looked mostly normal, except for his eyes, larger with an unusual reflective quality, and a faint pattern on his neck that resembled gills. We have a name for what lives in the lake, Dr. Chen said. SBL-7, sentient, biological life form, seventh identified, but that's just bureaucratic labeling. The locals' term, water devils, is just as accurate. What are they? I asked. Some kind of undiscovered species? They were, Dr. Chen said, before the military. Experiments. Now there's something more. A hybrid created when experimental compounds merged with an ancient dormant life form. He showed me classified reports detailing the military testing. Chemicals designed to enhance human adaptation to extreme environments, accidentally introduced to a previously unknown species. They've been evolving ever since, Dr. Chen said, becoming more complex, more intelligent, and reaching out to compatible humans. Like Jack's family, I said, pieces falling into place, and the missing children. Dr. Chen nodded. And now it seems like you, me. I'm not compatible with them. I'm just a scientist studying a lake. Jack and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. Your blood tests say otherwise, Dr. Chen said quietly. What blood tests? I never gave any blood samples. The EPA team took them yesterday while you were being questioned. Standard procedure. They test anyone who's had extended contact with the lake water. My heart raced. And you have markers we've only seen in people who've successfully merged with SBL7 entities. Your genetic profile is almost a perfect match. I felt sick. That's why I was recruited for this research position, isn't it? It wasn't random. Someone wanted me here. Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable. There's a faction within the containment program that believes cooperation with SBL7 is preferable to isolation. They've been bringing compatible individuals to the lake for years. As what? Test subjects? As potential ambassadors, Jack said. People who could communicate with whatever's down there. Help us understand what it wants. I thought of my dreams, the sense of being called to the lake center, the bioluminescent patterns that almost seemed like language. Had I been receiving their communications all along? There's more, Dr. Chen said hesitantly. Your blackouts, the times you can't remember. I stared at him. How do you know about those? We've been monitoring you. The cabin has cameras. 3 times in the past week, you've gone to the lake at night, entered the water, stayed under for periods exceeding human lung capacity. That's impossible, I whispered. But even as I said it, I remembered waking with wet sheets, water on the floor, my diving watch found in a sample container. The merge has already begun, Dr. Chen said gently. The question is what you want to do about it. Before I could answer, alarms blared from his computer. Jack rushed over. Military extraction team, he said grimly. Heavily armed, moving toward the lake access points. Dr. Chen cursed softly. They're not supposed to operate without clearance from the scientific division. What's happening, I asked. The military arm of the program, Jack explained. They've wanted to capture live specimens for years, study them in a controlled environment. Maybe weaponize their abilities. That would be disastrous, Dr. Chen said. SBL7 entities cannot survive outside their ecosystem, and attempting to remove them could trigger a defensive response from the collective. Collective? I asked. They function as a group mind, Dr. Chen said. Individual units, but with shared consciousness. Harming one alerts them all. The implications hit me. So this military team could provoke them into... what? Dr. Chen's face was grim. We don't know their full capabilities, but given their accelerated evolution and their ability to affect human biology, I wouldn't want to find out. Jack was gathering equipment, underwater lights, diving gear. We have to warn them. Stop the extraction team before they reach the center. How? I asked. They're armed. Not we, Jack said, looking at me. You. They'll listen to you. Why would they listen to me? Not the soldiers, Dr. Chen clarified. The entities. SBL7. They've chosen you as a point of contact. You might be the only one who can communicate what's happening. I stared at them both, the enormity of what they were suggesting sinking in. You want me to go into the lake? Talk to these things? It's already happening whether you want it or not, Jack said, his voice gentler now. The changes in your system, the blackouts, the dreams, you're connecting with them. I thought of the impossible pull I'd felt toward the lake since arriving. The sense that something was waiting for me there, calling to me. What if I refuse? Then the military takes specimens, Dr. Chen said simply. They study them, try to weaponize them, and when the collective responds, which it will, people die, maybe many people. Outside, we could hear helicopters approaching. Time was running out. I took the diving gear from Jack. I'll need a way to get past the soldiers. Dr. Chen handed me a small device. Government ID transponder. It'll show you as authorized personnel if they scan you. Jack gripped my shoulder. Remember who you are down there. Whatever they show you, whatever they offer, hold on to yourself. As I stepped out into the night, the sound of helicopters grew louder. Searchlights swept the lake surface. The extraction had begun, and I was walking straight toward it, carrying the weight of two worlds on my shoulders. The night air was cold on my skin as I made my way to the lake, keeping to the shadows. Military vehicles lined the shore, their headlights cutting bright paths through the darkness. Soldiers in black tactical gear moved with purpose, unloading equipment from trucks. I pulled on the wetsuit Jack had given me and hid behind a cluster of boulders near the water's edge. A few feet away, two soldiers guarded a small boat loaded with what looked like capture tanks and restraint devices. Whatever they planned to bring back from the lake, they wanted it alive. I had to get past them and into the water without being seen. I clutched the ID transponder Dr. Chen had given me, hoping it would work if I was caught. But before I could move, the soldiers were called away to help with equipment. This was my chance. I slipped into the water silently, keeping low, and swam toward the center of the lake, the dark circle that locals avoided, the place where boats disappeared. I didn't need my dive light. The moonlight was enough, and my eyes seemed to adjust better than they should have to the murky water. Another change I hadn't noticed happening. How many others were there? As I swam deeper, I felt a familiar pull drawing me toward the submerged town. It wasn't frightening anymore. It felt almost like coming home. I reached the church steeple I'd seen on my first dive, but this time I continued past it, toward the center of town, toward the old mine entrance. My lungs weren't burning, though I'd been underwater for minutes now. I should have needed air already. Instead, I felt a tingling sensation along my neck and realized with shock that I was somehow extracting oxygen from the water, like I had gills. I reached up and felt my neck. There were no openings, no physical gills, but the skin there felt different, softer, more permeable. I wasn't just holding my breath. I was breathing water. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. At the center of the submerged town stood a building larger than the others, the old mining company headquarters. Behind it, the dark mouth of the mine shaft gaped open, a perfect black circle against the rocky hillside. Light pulsed from within that darkness, the same blue-green glow I'd seen in my dreams. It throbbed like a heartbeat calling to me. Swam toward the mine entrance, past the rectangular doorway and into a tunnel that sloped downward. The walls gleamed with embedded crystals that caught and amplified the blue-green light, creating a pathway of gentle illumination. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that shouldn't have been possible given the region's geology. The ceiling arched high overhead, studded with the same strange crystals. The floor was smooth, almost polished, and at the center was a pool of water that glowed with inner light. Movement caught my eye. Along the walls, in shadowed alcoves, shapes shifted and flowed. At first they looked almost human, limbed creatures with heads and torsos, but as they moved into the light, they changed. Limbs elongated, bodies stretched and contracted, features flowed like liquid. They were beautiful in a way I had no words for. Not scary monsters, but beings of impossible grace, communicating through their movements in a language of form and flow. One separated from the others and approached me. As it drew closer, It took on a more human shape, perhaps sensing that would be more comfortable for me. It stood before me, its body still rippling slightly, like the surface of the lake on a windy day. And then it spoke, not with a voice, but directly into my mind. You have come. The words weren't English or any human language, but I understood them perfectly. Yes, I said aloud, my voice strange in my ears. I came to warn you. There are people above with weapons. They want to capture you. We know. They have come before. They'll hurt you, take you away for experiments. The being's form rippled, with what might have been amusement. They cannot take what they cannot find. We hide in plain sight. We become the water when threatened. I realized what the locals had meant about boats disappearing. It wasn't that the entities attacked them. They simply altered the perception of those above, making them believe they were somewhere else. Why did you call me here? I asked. To show you, to help you understand. The being moved closer, one limb extending toward me. It gently touched my face, and the world exploded into images. I saw the lake as it was before, a valley with a river running through it. I saw the first people who settled here, sensing something special in the water. I saw the mine being dug, going deeper and deeper until it broke through into the ancient chamber where these beings had rested for millennia. I saw the military experiments, chemicals mixing with the runoff from the mine, finding their way to the sleeping entities and changing them, waking them, but also mutating them from what they had once been. I saw the flooding of the valley, not just a measure to contain the entities, but a gift to them, a new home encompassing both their ancient chamber and the human world above. And I saw what they had become. Creatures of both worlds, evolving rapidly, learning to interact with the humans who ventured onto their lake. We choose carefully. The being told me, those whose bodies can adapt, those whose minds are open, like yours. The genetic markers, I whispered. The compatibility. Yes, for generations we have guided certain bloodlines, small changes, preparation. For what? For joining, for becoming more than either alone could be. I thought of Jack's family, of the physical changes I'd been experiencing. You've been changing me. You were already changing. We merely guided the process, showed your body what it could become. The being's form shifted again, becoming more like mine, a mirror reflection, but with subtle differences, larger eyes, a shimmering quality to the skin, elongated fingers with a hint of webbing. This is the bridge form, the joining of human and other. Some resist and suffer, some embrace and transcend. I thought of the military team above, preparing to capture these beings. What will you do about the soldiers? What we must, but we would prefer peace. Will you help us? How? Complete your change. Become fully what you are becoming. Then you can move between worlds. Speak for us to those who would harm us. I hesitated. If I complete this change, can it be undone? Nothing is permanent. All forms are fluid. But few choose to return once they have experienced the joining. Something moved in the water near us, a large shape approaching from another tunnel. As it came into the light, I saw it was Jack, but not the Jack I knew from above. His skin had a faint blue cast, and definite gill slits pulsed on his neck. His eyes were larger, reflective like a cat's. I wondered when you'd finally make it. Down here, he said, his voice strange but recognizable. They've been waiting for you for weeks. You're one of them, I said, not really surprised. Not exactly. I'm like you, a bridge. My grandfather was the first in our family. I'm third generation. He smiled, showing teeth that were slightly sharper than normal. It gets easier with each generation. The changes are less shocking. The military team, I started, won't find anything, Jack assured me. The entities have already cleared the center of the lake. All the soldiers will find is empty water and normal fish. Then why did you send me down here if there's no danger? Jack and the entity exchanged what felt like a silent communication. "Because you needed to see this place," Jack said finally, "to understand what's happening to you, what you're becoming, and because they need your help with something else." "The balance is shifting," the entity told me. "The changes we underwent, due to the military compounds, are accelerating. We are evolving too quickly. It causes instability." "What kind of instability?" "Between worlds, between forms, between minds. Some of us lose cohesion, lose self." I thought of the bizarre mutations in the fish, the water samples that changed overnight. "You're affecting the entire ecosystem." "Yes, and eventually, beyond the lake. We need someone who understands both worlds, someone who can help us stabilize." "A scientist," I said, understanding dawning. "You need a scientist who can also become like you, who can study the changes from both perspectives." "Yes, you." I looked down at my hands in the glowing water. The webbing between my fingers was more pronounced now, transparent skin connecting each digit. I hadn't even noticed when that had happened. On the surface, my career was in ruins, my reputation destroyed. I had nothing to go back to. But here, in this strange underwater world, I could do research no other scientist could ever attempt. I could study an entirely new form of life, from the inside. "What about the military?" I asked. "The EPA? They won't just let me disappear." "Doctor, Chen has arranged everything," Jack said. "As far as anyone will know, you left the lake after the EPA confiscated your research. Returned to whatever was left of your academic life. And my body, the changes, can be controlled with practice, concealed when necessary. Jack will teach you." I closed my eyes, feeling the water move against my changed skin. I should have been terrified, desperate to escape, to return to my human life. Instead, I felt a sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. "I need time," I said finally, "to think, to decide." "Of course. But do not take too long. The changes progress with or without your acceptance." As if to emphasize the point, a sudden pain shot through my shoulder blades. I gasped, doubling over. Jack swam to my side, supporting me. "The dorsal adaptations," he said softly. "They're starting early in you." I reached back and felt ridges forming along my spine, breaking through the wetsuit. Not gills exactly, but similar organs that would help propel me through water. "It hurts," I whispered. "Only the first time," Jack assured me. "Only when you fight it. Let it happen naturally." I tried to relax, to let the changes flow. The pain subsided, replaced by a tingling warmth that spread across my back. "Rest now," the entity told me. "Return to the surface. Consider our words. We will be waiting." Jack led me back through the tunnels up toward the surface. As we neared the edge of the submerged town, we saw lights sweeping the water above, the military team searching the lake center. "Stay low," Jack whispered. "Follow me." He led me along the lake bottom, away from the searchlights, toward a different part of the shore. As we swam, I noticed how easily I moved through the water now, my changed body slipping through. Currents with almost no resistance. We surfaced in a small cove, hidden by overhanging trees. The military activity was barely visible from here, just distant lights and the thrum of boat engines. "They won't find anything," Jack said confidently as we pulled ourselves onto shore. "By morning, they'll report another failed mission. The scientists will argue with the military commanders. Nothing will change. Except me," I said, looking down at my hands in the moonlight. The webbing was less pronounced now, shrinking as my skin dried. "I'm changing, Jack. Becoming something else." "Not something else," he corrected. "Something more." We made our way, back to my cabin through the woods, avoiding the roads and the military checkpoints. By the time we arrived, I was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. Too much had happened too quickly. Jack left me at the door with a simple instruction. Test yourself. See what you've become already. Then decide if you want to become more. After he was gone, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection. In the mirror, my eyes seemed slightly larger, with a reflective quality in the iris. My neck showed faint lines where gills had temporarily formed underwater. The webbing between my fingers had receded, but was still visible if I looked closely. Ran a bath and sank into the water. Immediately, the gills on my neck reopened, allowing me to breathe beneath the surface. I stayed under for 10 minutes, comfortable, at home in a way I'd never felt before. When I emerged, I noticed another change. My blood tests. I pricked my finger and examined a drop under my microscope. My cells were different, more efficient, with enhanced oxygen carrying capacity. My DNA would be changing too, I was certain. I spent the night reading through my backup research notes, making new observations about my own transformation. The scientist in me was fascinated, cataloging each change methodically. But another part of me, a newer part, was simply accepting, embracing what I was becoming. In the morning, I heard vehicles leaving. Looking out the window, I saw the military convoy driving away from the lake. As Jack had predicted, they'd found nothing. My phone rang. It was Dr. Chen. "The extraction team is withdrawing," he said without preamble. "They found nothing of interest. In the lake." "As expected," I replied. "Have you decided?" he asked. "I'm still considering my options." "Don't take too long, Dr. Monroe. Your blood work shows accelerated changes. In another week, you may not be able to pass as fully human anymore." After we hung up, I walked down to the lakeshore. The water called to me in a way I couldn't describe. Not a voice, but a pull that resonated in my changing body. I shed my clothes and waded in, feeling my body respond instantly. Gills opening, webbing extending, dorsal ridges emerging. I dove deep, moving more easily than any human could, and headed toward the sunken town, toward the mine shaft, toward the entities waiting below. I still hadn't made my final decision, but as I cut through the water like I'd been born to it, I knew which way I was leaning. The human world had rejected me long before the lake had changed me. Science, my passion, had turned its back when I needed support most. But here in this impossible place, I could be both scientist and subject, observer and observed, human and other. And maybe, just maybe, I could help two worlds understand each other before it was too late. A week passed. My transformation continued each day, bringing new changes to my body. I documented everything in my research journal with scientific precision, even as I marveled at what I was becoming. The webbing between my fingers was now permanent, though it could retract slightly when I was fully dry. My eyes had grown more sensitive to light, making me prefer the dim interior of my cabin during the day. And the ridges along my spine had developed into small, flexible fins that lay flat against my back when not in use. I spent hours each day in the lake, swimming deeper and staying under longer. My record was now 6 hours without surfacing. Underwater, I felt free in a way I never had on land. I'd made my decision. I would help the entities, become their bridge to the human world, use my scientific knowledge to understand and stabilize their rapid evolution before it affected the wider ecosystem. But first, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The military and Dr. Chen's team had studied these beings for decades. I needed their research. I called Dr. Chen and arranged a meeting at Jack's shop. This time, I arrived openly, no longer hiding. "You've progressed quickly," Dr. Chen observed. As soon as he saw me, his eyes lingered on my enlarged pupils, the faint blue tint to my skin. "Faster than any subject we've documented." "I'm not your subject," I said firmly. "I'm a scientist, same as you, and I need your research data." Dr. Chen hesitated. "The military controls most of the files, but not all of them. You've been studying SBL-7 for 47 years. You must have your own records. He nodded slowly. I do. But why should I share them? Because I can go where you can't, I said simply. See what you can't see. I'm becoming one of them, Dr. Chen. I can study them from the inside. Jack, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. She's right. Even I can't stay down as long as she can now. Can't go as deep. Whatever they're doing to her, it's more complete than anything they've done before. Dr. Chen looked thoughtful. Perhaps it's your genetic profile, or perhaps they've evolved to the point where they can create a more perfect hybrid. I don't care why, I said. I only care about understanding what's happening and helping them stabilize. Why help them? Dr. Chen asked. These entities have changed you without your consent, altered your body, your DNA. Some might call that an invasion. I considered his words. At first, maybe it was. But now it's a choice. My choice. And I choose to help them because they're not the threat here. We are. Dr. Chen studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I'll give you my research. But there's something you should know first. The military isn't done with this lake. They're bringing in a specialized team, not just to capture specimens this time, but to introduce new compounds. My blood ran cold. What kind of compounds? Accelerants. Designed to force rapid mutation in the entities. They want to speed up their evolution, observe the changes in a controlled time frame. That's insane, I said. The entities are already evolving too quickly. That's the whole problem. More accelerants could destabilize them completely. That's the point, Jack said grimly. Make them evolve so fast they burn out. Solve the problem once and for all. I thought of the beautiful fluid beings in the underground chamber, of their ancient history, their patient waiting. To destroy them through forced evolution seemed like the worst kind of violence. When? I asked. 3 days, Dr. Chen replied. The team arrives tomorrow to set up. They'll inject the compounds directly into the deepest part of the lake. We have to stop them. Dr. Chen shook his head. I've tried, filed objections, sent reports up the chain of command. The military side has taken control of the project. They see SBL-7 as a potential threat that needs to be eliminated, or a potential weapon they can't control, Jack added. I stood up. Then we need to warn the entities, help them prepare. How? Dr. Chen asked. What can they do against a full military team? I remembered what the entity had told me. We hide in plain sight. We become the water when threatened. More than you think, I said. But I need your research first. Everything you have on their biology, their capabilities, their evolution so far. Dr. Chen handed me a thumb drive. 47 years of observations, please. Use it responsibly. I spent that night reviewing Dr. Chen's files. The history of SBL-7 was more complex than I'd imagined. The entities had existed in a dormant state for thousands of years before the miners disturbed them. They were ancient, possibly predating humans in North America. The military compounds had awoken them, but also corrupted their natural development. The chemical accelerants had forced changes that should have taken millennia to evolve naturally. And now, the military wanted to push that process even further. According to Dr. Chen's research, the entities existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. They perceived time differently, experienced reality on levels humans couldn't comprehend. That explained their ability to affect perception, to seem to make boats disappear by shifting how humans experience that part of the lake. Most importantly, I learned about their connection to water. It wasn't just their habitat. It was a conduit for their consciousness. Through water, they could extend their awareness, influence other organisms, even manipulate memory and perception in humans who came into contact with that water. By dawn, I knew what we had to do. I called Jack and Dr. Chen back to the cabin. The military is making a fundamental mistake, I told them. They think the entities are individual organisms they can capture or kill. but they're a collective consciousness using the lake itself as their body. What are you suggesting? Dr. Chen asked. We can't stop the military directly, but we can help the entities protect themselves. I pointed to the lake outside my window. They need to temporarily shift their dimensional state, all of them together. Create what will appear to be a natural lake phenomenon that will prevent the military from injecting their compounds. What kind of phenomenon? Jack asked. A temporary merging of dimensions, I explained. It would create a localized disturbance in the water, like a whirlpool but more complex. Anyone trying to enter that area would be disoriented. Their equipment would fail, and they'd be forced to retreat. Can they do that? Dr. Chen asked, fascinated. I believe so, but it would take tremendous energy. They'd need to work together, the entire collective, and they'd need a focal point, someone who exists in both their world and ours. You, Jack said. I nodded. Me. We spent the next 2 days preparing. I created detailed maps showing where the military would likely try to inject the compounds. Jack gathered information from locals who worked at the docks, learning the military's exact schedule. Dr. Chen provided data on the compounds they planned to use. The night before the military operation, I entered the lake one final time as a transitional being. By morning, my transformation would be complete. I would be fully what I was becoming, not human, not entity, but something in between. A bridge. The underwater city looked different now, more alive somehow. Lights glowed in windows that had been dark before. Shapes moved through the streets in patterns that reminded me of dancing. In the central chamber, the entities were gathered. Hundreds of them, their forms shifting and flowing together in what seemed like a complex ritual. The one who had spoken to me before approached. You have decided. Yes, I said, I'll help you. But first, we need to stop the military from injecting new compounds into the lake. I explained the plan. The entities would create a dimensional shift centered on me, using my dual nature as a conduit. The shift would make the center of the lake temporarily inaccessible to humans. Any boats that tried to enter would be turned away by what would seem like natural forces, currents, fog, even electrical disruptions to their equipment. It will require great energy, the entity warned, and you must be fully joined with us, no longer between worlds, but of both worlds simultaneously. I understand, I said. I'm ready. The completion of my transformation wasn't painful, but it was intense. I floated in the center of the chamber, while the entities moved around me in concentric circles, their forms blurring together like watercolors. Their consciousness flowed into mine, not erasing who I was, but adding to it, expanding it. I felt my body changing one final time. The gills on my neck opened fully, becoming permanent. My eyes adapted to see spectrums beyond human perception. My skin developed the same reflective quality as theirs, able to shift its appearance slightly to blend with surroundings. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the mental ones. My consciousness expanded, suddenly aware of the entire lake as if it were an extension of my body. I could feel every fish swimming, every current flowing, every boat floating on the surface, and I could feel them, the entities, as clearly as I felt my own heartbeat, not as separate beings, but as parts of a greater whole that now included me. We are ready, they said in one voice. Are you? Yes, I answered, both aloud and with my mind. We rose together through the water, hundreds of entities and me at their center, moving toward the surface where the military boats would soon arrive. As we rose, I felt the dimensional shift beginning, reality bending slightly around us, the water becoming more than water. By dawn, we were in position. I floated just below the surface at the center of the lake, the entities spread out around, me in an enormous circle. Through our shared awareness, I could sense the military boats approaching, loaded with equipment and the chemical accelerants they planned to inject. As they neared the center of the lake, we began. The dimensional shift rippled outward from my position, changing the properties of water, light, even time in that area. To human perception, it would look like a sudden fog bank or a strange disturbance in the water. The boats slowed, their instruments going haywire. Through the water, I heard confused voices, orders being shouted. Readings are off the charts. Sonar's not working, can't get a depth reading. GPS is down, I can't tell where we are. One boat tried to push forward into the center. As it entered the shifted area, its engines sputtered and died. The soldiers on board became disoriented, some becoming violently ill, others falling into confused states where they couldn't remember what they were doing there. Another boat tried to drop probes into the water. The probes disappeared as they entered the dimensional shift, seeming to vanish into thin air. Through it all, I remained at the center. My consciousness spread through the water, directing the flow of energy. I could feel the strain on the entities. This level of dimensional manipulation took tremendous effort. We couldn't maintain it for long, but we didn't need to. After an hour of failed attempts, equipment failures, and unexplainable phenomena, the military commander ordered a retreat. I felt the boats turning away, heading back to shore. As they left, we gradually released the dimensional shift, letting reality settle back into its normal pattern. The entities dispersed, returning to the depths, while I remained near the surface, watching. I sensed Jack approaching in his boat. Before I saw him, I surfaced beside him, pulling myself aboard. It worked, I told him. They're leaving. Jack studied my changed appearance with fascination. You're different now, more than before, I nodded. The transformation is complete. I'm part of them now, but still me, both at once. What will you do? He asked as we headed back to shore. You can't exactly go back to your old life looking like that. I had already thought this through. I'm going to establish a research station here. Use my scientific credentials to create a legitimate presence on the lake. Study what's happening openly, but control what information gets released. The military won't just give up, Jack warned. I know, but Dr. Chen has contacts in the Scientific Oversight Committee. With his help, I can gain official authorization to be the primary researcher here. Create a buffer between the military and the lake. A guardian, Jack said with a smile. A bridge, I corrected, between their world and ours. In the months that followed, that's exactly what I became. With Dr. Chen's help, I established the Monroe Aquatic Research Center on the shore of the lake. On paper, it was a legitimate scientific operation, studying unusual evolutionary patterns in an isolated ecosystem. In reality, it was a protective zone for the developing hybrid species that lived in the lake's depths. My team consisted of other bridges, people like Jack who had partial transformations and could understand both worlds. We monitored the lake, documented the entity's development, and worked to stabilize their evolution. My own body continued to adapt. I could now shift between my fully human appearance, for the rare times I needed to meet with outside officials, and my hybrid form, for my work in the lake. In the water, I was as much entity as human, with all their abilities to move, communicate, and perceive. The military still watched us, of course. They never fully abandoned their interest in the lake. But with our official research status and the protection of several influential scientists who recognized the importance of our work, they kept their distance. Meanwhile, beneath the surface, something remarkable was happening. The entities were evolving not toward chaos, as the military had feared, but toward a new kind of harmony. With my help, they were stabilizing their changes, integrating the effects of the military compounds into their natural development. And they were learning from us, from the human aspects that bridges like me brought into their collective. They developed new ways of thinking, new perspectives on the world above the water. Sometimes at night, I would swim to the deepest part, Of the lake to the chamber where I had first truly met them. There, in the blue-green light of their home, I would feel the fullness of what I had become. Not a human studying strange creatures, but part of something ancient and wise that was evolving into something entirely new. In my most recent journal entry, I wrote, "Today marks 1 year since I first arrived at this lake, angry and bitter about my ruined career, hoping to find some small discovery that might redeem me in the eyes of the scientific community. Instead, I found an entirely new form of life, one that now includes me. I discovered not just a subject to study, but a new way of being." The Sa entities below and the humans above still have much to learn from each other. The path forward will not be easy. There will be those who fear what they don't understand, who want to control or destroy what they can't explain. But for every fearful soldier or suspicious agent, there's also a curious scientist, an open-minded explorer, someone willing to consider that what lies beneath these still waters isn't a threat but an opportunity. A glimpse of what might be possible when two worlds find a way to coexist. I used to think I was just Evelyn Monroe, disgraced limnologist, seeking redemption. Now I know I'm something more. A bridge between species, a guardian of ancient beings, a scientist studying the most remarkable evolutionary leap in Earth's history. And as I write these words with webbed hands, looking out at the lake with eyes that can see beyond human perception, I don't regret a single moment of the journey that brought me here. Beneath these still waters, I found not just a new species, but a new home.